Chapter 282. You want to ask me how I know so much? Ah, it's not that I know a lot, it's that you don't. Ninth brother, do you know that we dragons have a big secret? Hatred's attitude was even kinder than kindness. Li Yunxin was stunned. What secret? He just wanted to hear it first, regardless of whether it was the truth or not. But Hatred did not hesitate. He said in a deep voice, Immortal dragon soul. Do you know how the 9 of us came to be? Li Yunxin was still digesting the words, Immortal dragon soul. At this moment, he only opened his eyes wide and said, Ha! It was created after Shinryu subdued all the demons in the world. Hatred looked at Li Yunxin like an elder brother looking at a younger brother. Shinryu split his dragon soul in half. Half stayed in Shinryu's body, and the other half became us 9 brothers. Do you know how our big brother Chionyo came to be? First, he split half of the dragon soul in half, and then combined it with a big demon's energy, then he became Dragon Big. Then he split half of the dragon soul in half, and then combined it with the big demon's energy, then I became second brother. Li Yunxin thought for a while. You mean, the dragon soul that became Chionyo was a quarter of the original. And when it came to you, you split the remaining quarter and turned it into an 1/8, then next, it's a 16th. Yazi looked at him. That's right. So, 9th brother, you should know that when it comes to you, the dragon blood is already very thin. Li Yunxin said after a moment of silence. He did not know why Hatred told him this. He also did not know if what he said was true or false. But if it was true, it was really a very unpleasant thing. As a dragon child with an extremely thin bloodline, it was not a good thing. No wonder the 9th young master was so weak. Hatred saw his expression and smiled. 9th brother, you don't need to be sad. You should know that having a thin bloodline is also a good thing. Do you know why the divine dragon hasn't appeared for a long time? It's precisely because only half of his divine soul was left. Therefore its consciousness was not much. After being awake for a few days he would have to sleep for many years. As for us 9 brothers, although we don't sleep for many years like the divine dragon, we still sleep according to the days. Big brother Chionyo is only awake for a few hours a day. As for me it's been half a day. Your third sister Chao Feng stays awake longer than me. In this way 9th brother, you can be free 24 hours a day. Don't you think it's a good thing? When Li Yunxin heard this he slowly realized what he was going to say. That's why you asked me if I've lost consciousness at night recently. You know, I've always lost consciousness at night. But recently I did do a lot of strange things. For example, a month ago for some reason I fought with the ghost emperor of Li Kingdom who accidentally broke into our Tongtian swamp. For example, after that, I woke up every day to find that I was closer to the Qing Kingdom. For example, I finally found out that I was coming to the Wei River. So I think it's probably because my original 9th brother died. Li Yunxin looked at him silently and looked up at the sky at the same time. In about a quarter of an hour, the 9th young master would appear. The dragon's soul is not extinguished. Li Yunxin said in a low voice. Yes, the dragon's soul is not extinguished. Hatred looked at Li Yunxin. When a person is dead, there will be a ghost. When the ghost is scattered, both body and soul will be destroyed. When cultivators and demons die, there will also be ghosts. But if the ghost is not scattered, it can still turn to the ghost path and become a Yin spirit. When the Yin spirit is scattered and killed, then both body and soul will be destroyed. Therefore, compared to cultivators and demons, people in the secular world have one more life. But we dragons, even if our bodies are destroyed, our souls will not be destroyed. If we can't destroy them, we will find our own kind. Hatred reached out and patted his chest lightly. I am in Tongtian Swamp. Among the brothers, I am the closest to the Wei River. Little 9 is dead, so it will return to me. If I die again, little 9 and I will return to. Other than me, the closest one is your third sister, Chao Feng, and it will return to her. So, 9th brother, you must know that I am not always clear-headed because there is something missing in my body. Now I am back. Although I am not me at night, I have made up for it a little. This is the dragon's soul is not extinguished. You ask me how I know. Now that you have heard this, do you understand? Li Yunxin spent the time of 3 breaths to make his brain work fast to determine whether what Hatred said was true or false. The final conclusion was, it was very likely to be true. But, why are you telling me this? He tensed his body. I have plotted against you. And killed your 9th brother. Hatred shook his head and laughed. No. I have said it before. I've already told you that I've already acknowledged you as a member of the dragon race. You are my 9th brother now. As for why? Because the bloodline of dragons is rare. There are only 9 in the world. And because of our inconvenience, the demons are not very afraid of us. Now that I suddenly know that I have a ninth brother with high cultivation and great intelligence, how can I not be happy? And you didn't kill little Nine, you just asked him to belong to me. We come from the same source. So what you are saying now is that you have another bloodline of the dragon's soul out of nowhere. I can't wait to be happy. Why would I harm you? Li Yunxin calmly thought about it. If second brother's words came from a secular person's mouth, I would probably believe it. But coming from a demon, I find it hard to believe. Hatred stared at him. You killed a secular person and that person's blood relatives told you that they didn't care. Do you really think this is more believable than what I am saying now? You and I are demons after all. Yazi interrupted him. It's a dragon. Li Yunxin wanted to say more, but Hatred shook his head. The time is coming. Whether you believe it or not, remember, if you want to keep your life, you have to survive tonight. Use this formation to deal with little Nine so that you can survive. As long as you live until dawn, you don't have to worry about the matter between you and little Nine. Hatred smiled. Shinryu is coming. This night is for Shinryu to see if you are worthy of being a real dragons. Really coming? Li Yunxin only had time to say this, and Hatred had already retreated more than 100 feet away, as if he wanted to give him some time. But soon he stopped again, as if the picture suddenly froze. Hatred's face changed in an instant. His eyes suddenly widened, staring at Li Yunxin like a terrible beast. Then he roared, Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin sighed, turned around and fled. He fled to the city of Wei. The city was ablaze with fire. But the fire was not ordinary fire, it was the real fire that rushed out from the magic formation with resentment and spiritual power. If he was only a human cultivator of the state of true, he would be burnt to ashes the moment he rushed into the fire. If he was only a dragon son of the state of true, he could last longer in the fire, about a quarter of an hour. However, he had the formation spell that Kun Wuzi's remnant soul had left behind for him. He formed the formation spell and jumped into the sea of fire. Soon, a layer of misty clear light appeared around his body and blocked the fire outside. The ninth young master was tricked by Li Yunxin again and thought that he had killed him. Now that he had just woken up and saw this guy in front of him, he knew he was fooled again. The old hatred and the current humiliation made him lose his mind for a moment. He roared and rushed into the sea of fire with Li Yunxin. Although he didn't know who the other demon blood and long-air hatred was, it must be a demon that was afraid of water and loved fire. Relying on his natural ability to not fear fire, he also rushed into the real fire. Plus, he was a mysterious realm cultivator, so he was safe for a while. If this city of Wei was still an ordinary city of Wei, with the two demons as strong as steel, there was no way Li Yunxin could escape. But the reason why they chose this place as the battlefield was because the houses in the city had been refined by the real fire for nearly a month. Even if the bricks, tiles, and stones were not magic weapons, they were not ordinary things. Although the demons below the state of true or mysterious could not be smashed with one blow, it would take some effort to break them. It was as if the two demons had become highly skilled martial artists and were fighting in an ordinary marketplace. The ninth young master of the mysterious realm first found the direction where Li Yunxin was and wanted to rush there. But after destroying two houses, he realized the fact that he was almost buried even though he was as tough as steel. So he knew that this was not a place where he could show off his power. But he was not angry and even sneered in his heart. He had stayed by the city of Wei for 1,000 years. He often rode the clouds and flew over the city of Wei. How could he not know what the city looked like? He immediately saw the path of Li Yunxin in the fire, and according to his memory he took a shortcut and rushed over. But he did not expect to rush over. He did not know that although he was familiar with the city of Wei, he often looked at it from the sky. But although Li Yunxin had only been in the city of Wei for a few months, he had walked through many streets and alleys, engraved secret spells and talismans in many secret places to make his own spirit body. Who could be more familiar than him with that kind of engineering, turning the streets and alleys into his own meridians, and turning the landmarks into his own acupoints? Moreover, he had the mountain and mountain spiritual map that drew the topography of the city of Wei. The ninth young master's every move could be clearly seen on his fan. It was harder to catch him than to climb up to the sky. This was also what he had expected. The ninth young master had a high opinion of himself and was not someone who would easily bow down and admit defeat. Besides, he had lied to him many times. At this moment, killing was not the only thing that could relieve the hatred in his heart. The opponent knew the opponent best, and the arrogant also knew the arrogant. He knew that it was because of this that the ninth young master wanted to crush and defeat Li Yunxin in a certain aspect. The aspect that Li Yunxin thought he was strong in. So, what could be more to the ninth young master's liking than this matter? Li Yunxin thought he was smart and chose to hide here. But he did not know that he was more familiar with this place. So I'll be patient and catch him here, then I'll see how smart he is. Li Yunxin hoped that the ninth young master would think this way. Hence, ninth young master's thoughts were exactly as he had expected. Chapter 283. It was not a good thing to be impulsive. Once you fell into an impulsive state, it would be very difficult to get rid of it. People who were blinded by impulsiveness would become stupid. This would cause them to become obsessed with a certain idea, delusion, hatred, or hot blood that had nowhere to vent. Therefore, because of Li Yunxin's little trick, the ninth young master lost his mind and really chased him around the city for 2 hours. This surprised Li Yunxin. He thought that the ninth young master would only last for an hour at most, and then he would be able to talk to him. However, the pursuer behind him had an indescribable anger and was unwilling to let him go. His face was even more twisted in the twisted fire, and he almost caught him several times. If it was not for the fact that he had the incantation of the formation and could trigger spells to stop him from time to time, he might have really been buried here. In fact, Li Yunxin did have the ability to keep the ninth young master in this formation. Perhaps he could not kill him with one strike like he did to Kuan Wuxia when he was on guard. However, he could destroy most of his cultivation with one strike, and then sacrifice himself to stop him from leaving the formation, and finally bury him in the sea of fire. But the problem was what hatred had said before: Shinryu was coming. Bai Yunxin told him that Shinryu was coming, and hatred also told him that Shinryu was coming. Shinryu was an existence among the demons that could compete with the two sages of the world. It seemed to be the pinnacle of cultivation and martial arts in this world. Li Yunxin did not dare to easily guess why such a ruthless character would come. But he understood one thing: hatred said to him that Shinryu was coming had another meaning. This great demon of the mysterious realm was also shocked by Li Yunxin's means. He was afraid that Li Yunxin would really use some tricks when he was not the one controlling the body. He would destroy his body. Therefore, he told him about this matter to give him a warning. If Li Yunxin had really done something like this, first killing the family's youngest son, then killing the family's second son, it was useless to talk about the situation and weigh the pros and cons. He understood this, so he knew that he was in an awkward situation. The ninth young master wanted to kill him, but he couldn't kill the ninth young master. He could only use the big formation of the city of Wei to deal with him, so that he could stay alive until dawn. If what hatred said was true, that Li Yunxin had convinced him to believe in him, then he would receive Shinryu's approval, and become a true dragon. That was the best situation for him. The ninth young master was lured to the Pitfall Mountain and killed all the small demon kings nearby. Now he had become a great demon of the true state and killed 3 of Daodong's generals, causing the Taoists of the Langya Grotto heaven to return empty-handed. As long as he could survive this night, with this reputation, he was no longer a soft persimmon that could be picked on and pinched by others. Because of this, he forced himself to continue to deal with the ninth young master. He had the formation formula and was not afraid of the real fire, but he was a demon after all, and needed to breathe the Reiki of heaven and earth. He had entered the formation with a mouthful of Sanyang Qi, and had not taken a breath for more than 2 hours. The resentment and Reiki in the formation had been swallowed by the real fire, and there was no way to replenish it. Li Yunxin didn't know how the ninth young master was doing, but he knew that he would have to go out to take a breath after a quarter of an hour. However, the ninth young master seemed to be in good spirits. The city of Wei was full of flames, and only a silhouette could be seen, and it was constantly changing under the fire. When the ninth young master was chasing and running with him earlier, he only used all his strength and did not say anything. After a quarter of an hour, perhaps the anger in his heart was gradually overwhelmed by reason, he started to say some horrible resentful words to distract Li Yunxin. But for Li Yunxin, this level of spiritual attack was nothing more than a tickle. Besides, he had almost used up his primordial qi and it was already dangerous for him to hide. How could he be in the mood to argue with him? At this moment, the two ran into the Willow River. The Willow River used to flow slowly, and there were shady green trees beside it. But now, the water in the Willow River was long gone, and it was filled with melted magma. The magma flowed slowly in the flames, and transported the resentment and Reiki in the city to every part of the formation. When Li Yunxin arrived here, he turned around and saw the ninth young master coming with a burst of flames. He shouted while chasing, "Where are you going?" Logically speaking, there was a node that he had set in the city of Wei. That day he made the river full of sour soup, and carved a character on a bluestone by the river. When he escaped here, he used Danqing Taoist law to activate the Reiki in the character, and then he could temporarily reverse the Qi in the city, and block the ninth young master. Then he could take the opportunity to rush out of the formation, and change a mouthful of Sanyang Qi. But the problem was, when he rushed to the side of the blue stone, he found that the characters he had engraved had been destroyed. Ordinary people couldn't destroy it. The blue stone engraved with the talisman was harder than steel, and not something that could be done by humans. Maybe it was accidentally destroyed by the Taoist priests of the Langya cave when they set up the formation in the city. But the problem was that the circulation of the Reiki in the life-death formation was surprisingly similar to the one he had set in the city of Wei. He mistakenly thought that the talisman was still there and went straight here. Then he looked at the ninth young master behind him. He didn't have a formation spell to protect his body, and only relied on his Xian realm cultivation to fight against the true fire in the city for 2 hours. Seeing that Li Yunxin had no room to turn back, he was even more excited. He activated the Reiki in his body, and even his sleeves seemed to be burning. He attacked with a ferocious look and shouted, "Die!" At this critical juncture, Li Yunxin was no longer in the mood to care about what the future held. If he couldn't keep his life, what future would there be? He made up his mind, and used the last of his strength to activate the formation spell that Kun Wuxia left for him. In an instant, the resentment and Reiki in the life-death formation surged, and from all directions, it suddenly gathered towards the place where he was staying. But after all, he had just mastered the formation. He only knew the formation spell, but didn't know the principles of the formation and couldn't use it freely. Therefore, the activation of the spell in the formation was a beat slower. Usually it wouldn't matter if it was a beat slower. But at this moment, the newly formed formation only swept across the body of the ninth young master for a while, and he broke through it. This level of power could even be withstood by a true realm cultivator, not to mention a Shen realm demon. Li Yunxin's heart turned cold, and he thought of a few countermeasures in an instant. First, he could escape into his dragon palace and he could avoid the attack in front of him. But it didn't mean that the dragon palace couldn't be destroyed. He hid in the palace and the dragon escaped from the back door. Once the ninth young master found a way to destroy the folding fan, he would suffer a terrible injury. Then the Shen realm demon would come out and kill him and he would really die. Second, he gambled that the ninth young master was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and this attack only looked powerful and terrifying, but it didn't have much power. He would risk his life to withstand this attack, and if he didn't die he would make other plans. Even if he died, Bai Yanjun might have other ways to revive him. But there must be a better way, for example. Countless thoughts flashed through Li Yunxin's mind in an instant. Every one of them seemed to be able to temporarily escape this disaster, but the losses caused by every one of them seemed to be too heavy for him to bear now. But the ninth young master's attack had already arrived. How could the speed of a Xian realm demon be compared to that of a true realm cultivator? Li Yunxin frowned and his eyes widened. He decided to meet the attack head-on. Kun Wuxia once said that even a Xian realm demon couldn't last more than 2 hours in this formation. How could he be so strong? He gathered all the true qi in his body and fiercely attacked. Then he was dumbfounded. Before his palm could touch the body of the ninth young master, the profound realm great demon was like a puppet with a broken string, falling head first into the willow river filled with lava. Li Yunxin stood rooted to the ground. He spent 3 breaths to think whether this was a trick of the ninth young master. Then he realized how deep that guy's hatred for him was. He wasn't even an arrow at the end of its flight, and was about to be burned to death by the true fire in the formation. But when he finally had a chance to kill Li Yunxin, he wasn't even afraid of dying again, and squeezed out the last bit of his strength. He stood in the fire, staring at the floating body of hatred for a while. After thinking for a while, he sighed, waved his hand and fished him out. Once he lost the protection of his spiritual qi, the strong body of the Shen realm Long Sun quickly turned red in the true fire, like a piece of iron that had been heated for a long time. His golden robe was woven from an unknown material, and it was still intact after being treated so roughly. But the golden crown on his head had been melted, and his hair was loose. Li Yunxin carried this tall and strong body weighing for a while and finally sighed again. He used the last bit of spiritual qi in his body to fly out of the formation. 2 hours passed and the sky was still dark. Li Yunxin's vision was also dark for a while. He stayed in the fire for 2 hours and his eyes were full of dazzling light. Now that he was out of the city of Wei and saw the fire outside, his vision was dark, and he couldn't even see the moon and stars in the sky clearly. But there were no stars or moon. It was a cloudy night, and the clouds in the sky were heavy and very close. After a while, Li Yunxin's vision became clear again, and he threw the ninth young master on the ground. He took a step back, then another step and another step. Finally, he stood on the high city wall of the city of Wei, and could enter the formation again after a short while. Then he waited for the ninth young master to wake up. He caught his breath. Then he felt a little hot. So he opened the folding fan in his hand and fanned himself gently in front of his chest, and his vision fell on it inadvertently. From this fan he could see the people around the city of Wei, he could see whatever he wanted to see, and he could let others see what he wanted to see. But the people in the painting were also different from each other. For example, Yunzi, who was taken into the painting, had the cultivation of the true state, and was a half-insane remnant soul. So the color was darker, as if it was casually drawn with light ink. And this dragon son, who had taken in hatred in Qi-Wen, had a high cultivation. As a result, the people in the painting were brightly colored. Upon closer inspection, even their clothes and belts were vivid and lifelike. But at this moment, Li Yunxin saw an even more eye-catching existence in the painting. This existence seemed to be outlined with gold powder. He had used the power of millions of ghosts to draw the spirits of the mountains and rivers around the city of Wei into the Lingtu, so the painting was actually a miniature reality. Whatever existed in reality could be seen in the painting. And because all things had spirits, and the spiritual qi was intertwined, the spiritual power in the real world could also be shown in the painting. So there was a difference between the image of the true state and the mysterious state. But the new one in the painting, Li Yunxin couldn't see it clearly. In fact, he didn't even know if it was a human shape. Yunzi and hatred were in human shape, which meant they had the distinctive characteristics of humans or demons, and were essentially different from the natural earth, rocks, and plants. But the thing he saw now, it was like a ball of light. Inextricably linked. It had a golden core. Countless golden lights extended from the core to the surroundings, almost closely related to the mountains, rivers, and plants in the painting. It was hard to say where it belonged to this thing and where it belonged to nature. In other words, it seemed to be integrated with nature and the spiritual qi of this world. It was an inseparable part of the background of this world. It was an existence that surpassed Li Yunxin's current understanding. Was Shinryu. Li Yunxin forcibly suppressed the surprise in his heart, and gently let out a breath. At the same time he resisted the urge to look up at the sky. Shinryu had arrived. And now he was looking at himself. So he silently stared at the ninth young master for a long time, and then smiled. He felt that he could do what he was best at. For example, acting. Chapter 284. The ninth young master, who was seriously injured, woke up after an hour, which was a long time for Li Yunxin. Because he knew that in this world, one of the most powerful beings in the world of living beings, was right above his head. The dark clouds in the night sky must contain the existence of a true dragon. In his fan, the golden light above his head was vibrating rhythmically, as if it was breathing with the world. Therefore he spent an hour thinking, what kind of person did Shinryu like? There was no way to be sure about this. He didn't know Shinryu well enough. According to Lord Dongting, Shinryu loved his ninth son, so he sent him to his father. It was to protect the dragon soul inhibition in Dongting, and also to ask Lord Dongting to protect him. According to what Yazi said, the dragon race didn't care about a certain dragon son. After all, they came from the same origin as the divine dragon. Now, there was a dragon bloodline like Li Yunxin among the dragons as a whole, which was a great thing for Shinryu. But in fact, there was another darker conjecture. For people like Li Yunxin, it was almost an instinct. Good things were always rare, but darkness was everywhere. For example, as a big demon known for his brutality, hatred's friendly attitude towards him was not normal at all. Li Yunxin tried to convince himself that it's a good thing to have more dragons' bloodline. But what was good about this good thing? Good that our happy big family has a new member? He was not a 7 or 8-year-old kid. No matter in his previous life or this life, he had experienced the most dangerous and ferocious side of the world when he was 7 or 8 years old. It was indeed good to have one more member. As for why it was good, Dragon 9 died and ran into Hatred's body. Hatred's body was shared, but he didn't get angry. Instead he accepted it calmly. Compared to other reasons that were brighter and more friendly, Li Yunxin was more willing to believe that, for example, if the other 7 died, if Hatred had a way to get them all into his body, then he might have a way to make himself an even more terrifying existence. The theory that the dragon's soul was indestructible and the theory that the 9 sons were originally split from half of the dragon's soul, when they were mixed together, it was hard for Li Yunxin not to have such a thought. In that case, if Hatred had such thoughts and actions, would the dragon god have the same thoughts? Recall all the clones that were sent out? If these deductions were true. But now, Li Yunxin had appeared, he could actually create extra dragon's bloodline. It was almost as if he could create dragon souls out of thin air. With this conjecture in mind, he looked back at Hatred's attitude and the dragon god's attitude. They actually stayed for 2 hours for a mere demon of the realm of truth. Wouldn't that be easier to explain? He knew the way to create the dragon's bloodline. He was now a treasure. No matter what Hatred and Shinryu intended to do with this extra bloodline, and no matter what was the unknown story between Shinryu and Dragon Sun. Naturally, there were many other possibilities. But one of the rules that Li Yunxin liked was, if it's not necessary, don't increase the body. As for himself, if he could use a simple, direct and dark idea to speculate and explain something, then he wouldn't let himself believe in another seemingly bright but much more troublesome and confusing reason. Right now he wanted to try to verify this idea, to see if a small character of the realm of truth, a small demon, could figure out the thoughts of Shinryu, the existence closest to God in the world of the living. Therefore, when the 9th young master finally woke up, Li Yunxin sat on the high city wall of Wei and sighed, "9th young master, why did you do this?" The fire was still burning behind him and he sat on the battlement of the city wall. It made him look like he was sitting on a throne, and his back was against a glorious wall of fire. The 9th young master slowly got up from the ground. This great demon's body had suffered serious injuries. His movements were sluggish like an old rusty machine. He used his arms to prop himself up, turned over and sat on the ground looking up at Li Yunxin. Therefore, Li Yunxin saw the flame of hatred in his eyes that had not yet been extinguished. He raised his voice again, "I saved you. Does this count as a life for a life? You even killed one of my clones. Speaking of which, you owe me." The 9th young master breathed heavily for a few times, and Li Yunxin saw some sparks coming out from his mouth and nose. He should be breathing out flames like how he breathed out clouds and mist? But everything around him was illuminated red by the flames, and Li Yunxin could not see clearly. The 9th young master stared at him and hissed, "Life? It's not a matter of life and death between us." Li Yunxin smiled. This was the answer he wanted. He hoped that the 9th young master would say this, and then he could say something else that was not only for the 9th young master to hear. He leaned forward slightly and put his arms on his knees. He looked down at the demon under the city wall and sighed again, "You know, sometimes you make me feel embarrassed. I mean, my friend, don't always say things like you lied to me and you played with my feelings. Every time we talk you are so emotional and you can't solve the problem. You and I are not children. You are more than 1,000 years old, and what about me? Am I 15 or 16? You can say 16, I feel ashamed every time I hear you say these things. This is how the world is. Some people pay with sincerity, and some people feed the dogs when they meet with bad people. When you encounter this kind of thing, you have to try to accept it and not feel that the whole world owes me and is against me. I want to go against the heavens and I want to change my fate. This is not courage, this is Chinibyu. Don't you realize what happened between us? You can't beat me. At least you can't beat me tonight. When your second brother comes out in the morning, you can't do anything to me at all. Because Shinryu will also come, he will support me. Why don't you take advantage of the fact that I still feel guilty and propose something that we can accept?" Li Yunxin spread his hands and said, "I think this is the wisest way to do it. You want to say that you did those things to me, and now you say that I reap what I sow and endure it." The 9th young master gritted his teeth and said, "Dream on." "That's what I mean." Li Yunxin said calmly, "In your world, I am a bad person who played with your feelings and abandoned your heart. But in the real world, bad people may not necessarily have bad karma, and even live a good life. Let's say I am your bad person. But you can't do anything to me and you have to accept it. I repeat, I will give you the whole night to negotiate. If you don't cherish it, I won't wait for you after the deadline." As he said this, he glanced at the surface of the fan. The spot of light that represented the true dragon was still there. It was hard to say whether Shinryu liked him or not, but at least he didn't lose interest. The 9th young master seemed to have heard the funniest joke. He was so angry that he laughed. "Shinryu? Support you? What are you up to this time?" Li Yunxin smiled and said calmly, "You know what? I didn't lead you here, it was your second brother who brought me here. He wanted me to get through tonight safely. Do you know why?" Li Yunxin looked at him, "Because after I kill you, I can become you again. This means that there is a 10th dragon son in this world. I am a small figure in the true realm, and hatred is a big demon in the mysterious realm. There are not many big demons in the mysterious realm in this world, but demons in the true realm are not rare, but he treated me gently and politely. because he knew I have this way. According to Hatred, Shinryu is also interested in this. When Li Yunxin said this, he slowed down and glanced at the fan, then his heart skipped a beat. That was because the spot of light that represented the true dragon also pulsed in an inconspicuous manner. If Li Yunxin didn't spend a lot of effort to draw this picture, he would even think that the jump was an illusion caused by the jumping flame behind him. The original light spot was jumping slightly, as if it was breathing with the heaven and earth. Now that such a change happened, did it mean that the existence felt the emotion of surprise? Emotions could be hidden. But the mountains, rivers, and even people shown in this picture were the reflections of the origin of all creatures. Emotions could be hidden, but the origin could not be hidden. Everything would be shown in the most essential way in this picture. Li Yunxin had never thought of it. His parents were also masters. But they were not so good that they could make ring too. Therefore he knew very little about this rare treasure and he knew very little about it. Now that he had a ring too in his hand, he realized that there were still many mysteries that he hadn't understood before. If this slight jump really meant that the powerful existence's emotion had changed, Li Yunxin forced himself not to jump in surprise. It also meant that he had a powerful weapon. He could feel that person's emotion. With this thought in mind, he decided to test it again. He wanted to know if it was just a coincidence or if it was true. So after saying, according to Hatred, Shinryu is also interested in this, he said slowly but clearly, I guess your second brother guessed what Shinryu is thinking. If Li Yunxin's previous guess was correct, Hatred may have other plans. Shinryu is also planning something. Then after he said these two sentences, Shinryu would definitely have a reaction. As expected, the light spot jumped slightly again. But maybe because it was already surprised before, this time the change was even less obvious. If he hadn't been staring at the fan, he would have missed it. Li Yunxin was silent for a while and let out a sigh of relief. He was happy from the bottom of his heart. It was as if the heavy burden on his body had suddenly disappeared. He felt that his hands and feet were no longer bound, and even the scorching air around him had cooled down. He wasn't afraid of challenges at all. He was only afraid that the situation wouldn't be under his control, and he wouldn't have any clues. But now he felt that he had regained, even if it was just a little, the initiative. So he put a bright smile on his face. He looked at the ninth young master and his tone became light. I heard that Shinryu is also interested in this. I guess your second brother guessed what Shinryu is thinking. But those two are existences that I can only look up to, and as a nobody, I don't dare to guess what they are thinking. I can only rely on the truth. Dragons are powerful and mysterious. How powerful was Shinryu in the past? They dominated the four seas and subdued all the demons in the world. When he said this, he seemed to become excited. He waved the fan in his hand and quickly glanced at the surface. The spot of light moved again. Did it mean joy and satisfaction? But what will happen after that? After conquering the country, we have to defend it, so there are 9 suns to guard the 4 sides. But there are so many demons in the world. And there are Daotong and Kenzo who are watching. Although dragons are strong, they can't fight against the world alone. Why? Because their bloodline is thin. But as he said this, the spot of light moved as usual. But now I have a way. If you die, I will replace you. If I die, I might have a way to replace you. The dragon's soul is endless. If there can be a 10th dragon son, there can be an 11th, a 12th, a 13th. Li Yunxin looked at the 9th young master. Do you still not understand? In a sense, to Shinryu, I am much more important than you. So, do you think the dragon god will support me? Li Yunxin felt that his words were reasonable and sincere. And the 9th young master was not an idiot. He was just a very impulsive person. This impulsive person could only listen to Li Yunxin's words because he had not recovered from his serious injuries. Thus, at this moment he finally listened and thought about it a little. He did not fly into a rage immediately. He stared at Li Yunxin with a look of despair, anger, and sadness. My second brother really lured you here and still wants to help you? Li Yunxin looked at him sympathetically. Yes. The 9th young master was silent for a while in the raging flames. Then he looked up at Li Yunxin. How did you become me? Thus, Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. He was finally willing to face the problem. He asked this question, which meant that he had taken the first step. Although he didn't know what the final outcome would be, at least it was better than recklessly pouncing on him. Even if the 9th young master, who was in a state of rage, didn't have the intelligence to look directly at him, he was still a profound realm demon. Thus, Li Yunxin smiled and said, I took over your body. He was just saying it casually and did not expect the 9th young master to hear it. The dragons were in a state of deaf to everything related to this word. Then he habitually looked at the folding fan in his hand. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes wide. Because the spot of light shook violently. Chapter 285. Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. Shinryu heard this. He could hear it. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and tried to suppress the waves in his heart. However, he was not sure if it was a coincidence. If the Dragon Son didn't know but Shinryu did, it meant that Shinryu might know the method of possession. But if Shinryu knew the method of possession, what was the use of him? He needed to confirm it again. Thus he stared at the ninth young master. Only by doing this would he not show the shock in his heart on his face. Then he sighed, "You can't hear it, can you?" The ninth young master frowned angrily and sadly. "Can't hear what?" Li Yunxin was silent for a moment. Then he made a bold decision. He looked at the ninth young master. "I said, Bai Yanjun taught me the method of possession. You can't hear it, can you?" When he said this, he used the shadow on his face to cover his eyes. He stared at the light that represented Shinryu on the fan. Then, the light flickered again. Shinryu could hear it. Shinryu knew about possession. Maybe he knew it before, but he was surprised that he knew it too. Maybe he didn't know it before, but Seiji's words made him know that there was such a method. But no matter what, it was a fact. So, Li Yunxin had to make a decision that could put him in a difficult situation, to tell Bai Yanjun about it. Because, if Shinryu really wanted to get the method of possession from Li Yunxin, and if he really didn't have any good intentions, a Supreme Realm Great Demon would have a million ways to get what he wanted from him. He made a mistake before, mentioning possession in front of Shinryu, which put him in danger. Thus, he had no choice but to make his second mistake, letting Shinryu know that his method came from the Yamakuin. Regardless of whether he believed it or not, he would always be wary of it. But as for how long this fear would last and whether Bai Yanjun would go mad when he found out about this, he couldn't care less. Damn it. What was going on? How could he have heard it? If he could hear it, how could he not know? Li Yunxin had never missed Bai Yanjun so much. He decided that the next time they met, he had to make an agreement with the Yama King so that he could find him. But the ninth young master ignored this sentence again. He felt that he was being played again. Thus, the anger in his heart that had been gradually extinguished began to burn again. He staggered up from the ground and roared at him, "Speak!" Flames spewed out of his mouth and nose as he revealed his godly body. The golden scales on his body began to shine and there was a red mist around him. His body was recovering at a terrible speed. The ninth young master, who was obsessed with a simple but strong emotion, was like a child. He was immersed in his own world, his own sorrow and pain. He didn't know that everyone else had more complicated and deeper thoughts. This made Li Yunxin feel, "I really envy you." Li Yunxin stood up from the battlement of the city wall and sighed. The ninth young master opened his eyes wide in confusion. But Li Yunxin shook his head again and smiled. "You were born in the dragons and have a noble status. Although your personal ability was not high, you had the power of the dragon god to protect you. Moreover, you lived near Dongting and your father protected you. Now that you died, you ran to your second brother's body, using his body to take revenge without any scruples. That's probably what a pure heart is like. Living in your own world and emotions, you don't need to think about other people's feelings. For example, you tried to kill me just now. If I hadn't been thinking about something else, not only your body but also your second brother's body would have been gone. Now you want to do it again. I mean, haven't you considered your second brother's feelings?" The ninth young master's eyes were red. "I am just me. What does other people have to do with me?" Li Yunxin sighed again. "So you see, you don't care about your second brother's feelings and you didn't care about my feelings before. You used to be an elegant and evil villain, but now you show a sad and aggrieved look. It's really disgraceful. I don't know if your other brothers are the same as you. So, I really feel sorry for the dragon god." But after saying these words, the ninth young master was stunned. It seemed that his mind filled with anger suddenly stopped. He thought for a long time and suddenly frowned and interrupted Li Yunxin. "What did you just say? My father protects me?" "Your father, Lord Dongting?" Li Yunxin looked at him. "Otherwise, why do you think a mysterious realm demon can live in peace with you?" The ninth young master was stunned for a while and shouted, "Because I am Dragon's son." "Because you are also his son." Li Yunxin looked at him. "Lord Dongting wants to protect the dragon soul in Dongting, so he lives here. And because of this, he can't let you know his identity. So think about it again. Think about it. Even your father feels that he can't give you any secrets or important tasks, right?" Li Yunxin sneered. But he told me these things, everything. Don't you realize it? Everyone but you has things they have to do, responsibilities they have to bear. But only you are still immersed in your own feelings. No wonder you were sent to Weishui River. No wonder you can't even guard Weishui River. No wonder you can be killed by me, a human cultivator in transcendent realm. The ninth young master widened his eyes and stood still. He couldn't say a word. Originally, sparks were exhaling from his mouth and nose, and his body was originally surrounded by a crimson mist. But now the mist around him was fading, and the golden light on his body was fading. His scales and mane were shedding little by little, and his body was shrinking little by little. After a quarter of an hour he became a human again. Then the ninth young master who possessed hatred looked at Li Yunxin and opened his mouth. It seemed that he wanted to say something but couldn't. Li Yunxin looked at him with pity. Now you have calmed down. Do you want to have a good talk? The ninth young master stood silently in the firelight. He thought for a long time and looked up at Li Yunxin. What do you want to talk about? His voice had completely calmed down. Li Yunxin pointed to the distance and said, let's talk about this place. Weishui River was supposed to be your fief, but it was occupied by a group of demons. Yesterday you went to the Pitfall Mountain and had a life and death battle. Most of the demon kings nearby have been killed. It's all thanks to you. Now I am Long Josie and Chiwen is also me. I should take over Weishui River. But if you want. Li Yunxin slowed down and waved the fan in his hand. We can share this mountain and river. The ninth young master looked at him with a pair of cold eyes and sneered, share. Oh. I will give you a body. Li Yunxin said seriously, it may not be the way you like it and it may not be stronger than your previous body. But at least you won't have to live in someone else's body. The light on the fan jumped slightly. The ninth young master looked at him suspiciously. You? The last time you thought that, I killed you. Li Yunxin smiled. If I can find a body for myself, I can find a body for you. Then we can manage Weishui River together and recover our lost land, okay? The ninth young master still stared at him and didn't say anything. After a while he said, isn't it another one of your tricks? Li Yunxin looked at him and said, it's not that I don't feel a little guilty. The mysterious realm demon paced a few steps on the spot. He left footprints on the mirror-like magic circle outside the city. Every step almost melted the mirror. After a while, he raised his head again. Tell me about the Lord Dongting. You have the blood of the divine dragon and the Lord Dongting. You were originally a little stronger than me. But some of your power is sealed in Dongting and becomes a part of the inhibition of Dongting, and this inhibition of Dongting is to protect part of the dragon soul in the lake. Li Yunxin confessed everything he knew without any reservation. The Lord Dongting is guarding the dragon soul in the lake. You are his son, so he won't hurt you. But you think he is forced by the majesty of the divine dragon, right? The ninth young master listened in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while he asked again, tell me about what happened today. Li Yunxin was a little stunned and knew what he was talking about. So he continued, the Daotong is going to war with the demons, so they decided to kill you. They killed a dragon son to cause turmoil, and then they pretended to take the dragon soul. They probably had to wait for the demons to gather in Dongting. They planned to kill them all. So in fact it's hard for you to live without me. But I think the Shinryu also had the same idea as the Daotong. They asked the Taoists to gather in Dongting, and then they gathered and killed them. But the situation was messed up by me before the two sides had time to take action. In fact, it was not me but an organization called the Freemasons. Do you know them? The ninth young master gritted his teeth and shook his head. Li Yunxin continued, the Freemasons wanted to fish in troubled waters, but I found them out. The Daotong knew that the Freemasons might be lurking among them, so they changed their plan and went back to investigate, but the dragon soul was taken away by the Golden Rock's adopted daughter, by Yunxin. I couldn't stop it. This is what happened after I came to the city of Wei. The ninth young master took a long breath. You mean you stopped the war between the demons and the Daotong? Li Yunxin smiled, just a little work. It turns out that I really don't know anything, the ninth young master said in a low voice. I thought I was sent to a remote and dangerous place, but in fact it's the core of everything. Li Yunxin patted the battlement of the city wall beside him. In my opinion, the Shinryu still values you, because you are the only dragon son who doesn't sleep for a while. But his comfort didn't seem to work. The ninth young master sighed again, but you've been me for just over a month, and you know so many things. He raised his head. Li Yunxin, who are you? He asked a good question. Li Yunxin squinted his eyes slightly and looked into the distance. If others saw him like this, they would think that he was lost in memories and even a little sad. He gritted his teeth at the right time, which made him look like a guy who had a blood feud, but it was all in the past. Then he said in a low voice, "The Freemasonry and I are irreconcilable. I don't have a good impression of the Daotong. I was born as a human, but I don't want to be one. Now that I've become a demon, it's the best ending for me. So, I really hope that we can bury the hatchet. I'm a very good Taoist painter. I'm probably the most brilliant Taoist painter in existence in this world, not one of them. If you want a body, I can make one for you." The ninth young master was silent for a while and smiled. "What kind of body can you make for me? It depends on whether you like a handsome one or a burly one. It's not impossible if you like girls and you can customize the skin color," Li Yunxin said seriously. "I can satisfy you. I'm very strong." "Ha!" The ninth young master shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." He raised his head and looked at Li Yunxin again. Li Yunxin felt that his eyes were gradually brightening, no longer blinded by hatred and anger like before. I don't want this kind of charity from you." He looked at Li Yunxin seriously. "I'm the Wei River Dragon King, the peerless demon. Now, I'm just entrusting the dojo to you temporarily. You better listen up. Since you said you want to recover Wei River, you have to do it. If it's not managed well or if it's taken away by something else, I'll come back to make trouble for you." Li Yunxin opened his mouth and was silent for a while. But finally he smiled and said, "Okay. It's both my reputation and yours." "Show me my demon body," the ninth young master said. Li Yunxin got up from the city wall, jumped down and landed lightly on the ground. Then he showed the chi-kissed demon body with dark green scales, bright red antlers and snow-white mane. The ninth young master stared at Li Yunxin carefully for a long time. Then he let out a deep sigh. "So beautiful." Then he suddenly swung his robe sleeves and a thick cloud of fire wrapped his body. With a loud boom, the profound realm great demon shot straight into the sky and fled far away. Li Yunxin stood in the blazing fire in the city of Wei for a long time without saying a word. After half an hour he let out a sigh and turned into a human again. With his hands clasped behind his back, he walked slowly along the city wall, as if he was taking a walk in the night. The surrounding air was still hot and filled with the thick smell of sulfur. But at this moment he felt cool, because his heart was slowly cooling down. There were many things that had been pressing on his heart, and he couldn't get rid of them. Some were related to his life and some were related to his future. He had seen through the Freemasonry's conspiracy, and asked Kun Wuxia to bring the two captives to Daotong, which could be considered as saving his life. Then he designed a plan to clear the demons that were entrenched in Wei River, which could be considered as giving himself a piece of pure land. But, after solving these things he still felt depressed. Until now he had solved the problem of the ninth young master. In fact, compared to the previous two things, this was considered a small matter. But at this moment, when this small matter was removed from his heart, he finally felt relief and pleasure. Li Yunxin walked around the city half a circle in the night. Then he stretched himself. Chapter 286. It's already 9 o'clock. According to the saying in Li Yunxin's previous world, it's almost midnight. It doesn't take him a whole night to solve the problem of the ninth young master. Now he is safe for the time being. But it just looks good. Because in the sky above his head, there was another existence that was watching his every move. If hatred is right, it is a test for him. Few people in the world can be tested by Shinryu. But Shinryu knows it and Li Yunxin knows it, but Shinryu doesn't seem to know that Li Yunxin knows it. Li Yunxin walks around the city for half a circle, then turns around and walks to the south. To the west of the city of Wei is Weishui River, and to the southwest is Dongting. To the north is the direction of Jinghua, and to the northeast is the Wild Mountain. To the south is the vast wild forest. This vast forest extends for thousands of miles to the south, and then there is a big city. But it doesn't mean there are no people in the wild forest. In fact, there are still some hermits, hunters and mountain people living in the forest. Hunters and mountain people like to live together, forming villages of different sizes. Hermits want to live alone, but in fact they are not far from the city of Wei or the villages of hunters and mountain people. They always need oil, salt and barter. When Li Yunxin lived in the city of Wei, he heard that there were hermits in the south of the city, and he asked people curiously. Therefore he knows that there are hermits living in a place called Suigang 10 miles away from the city. But at this time there should be no one there. Daotong has made so many troubles and people around the city of Wei who can't move have probably fled for their lives. The government doesn't care, so who can do justice? 10 miles is not far for Li Yunxin. At least it is much closer than from Dongting to the city of Wei. He walks for a while, and the burning feeling behind him gradually fades, and the light gradually becomes dim. This is a path with lush vegetation on both sides. There are insects chirping in the vegetation and even a slight cool breeze. He fanned himself gently as he walked, as if he felt a little warm, and saw the spot of light following him on the surface of the fan. He rubbed his neck again and glanced at the sky. He found that the thick clouds in the sky had dispersed. There was a bright moon and countless stars in the night sky. Seiji wondered where Shinryu was. But such a great demon must have a way to hide itself that he could not think of. The fact that Shinryu hadn't appeared yet meant that the test wasn't over yet. Therefore, Li Yunxin wanted to do something else for him, to show him what he was capable of. He hoped for a good ending. He really wanted to have a period of relative peace to lick his wounds and recuperate. But in fact, there was indeed something that had to be dealt with. It was like killing two birds with one stone. Not long after, Li Yunxin saw the Green Hill. He knew why this place had such a name. The hermit lived in a thatched cottage in front of a gentle hillside. The green grass on the hillside was like a carpet, as if it was painted with paint. It was an adobe house with a thatched roof. The lintel of the door was low. With Li Yunxin's stature, if he walked in, he would have to unconsciously bend over to avoid messing up his hair. There was a courtyard in front of the house. The walls of the courtyard were low fences, and the door was also made of twigs of different thickness. The previous owner must have not been a diligent person. There seemed to be a small vegetable field in the courtyard, but it had been a long time since anyone worked on it, so it was overgrown. A half-rotten wooden hoe lay on the ground, and there seemed to be thin white mushrooms growing on the handle. There was no well in the courtyard. There were no windows. He didn't know where the toilet was. All in all, for the poor people of this era, this place could barely be considered a place with a house and a courtyard. But for Li Yunxin, he would rather live under the sky than here. He hesitated for a while in front of the door, then pushed it open and walked to the door. When he pushed the door open, he smelled the smoky smell of fire in the house. This meant that there was a stove in the house. Li Yunxin lowered his head slightly and walked in. He casually drew an oil lamp on the mud wall. The mud fell down and then the oil lamp on the wall lit up. A warm and soft white light filled the house. So Li Yunxin saw a half-tilted stove and a half-collapsed brick bed in the house. Then there was nothing. He exhaled softly and fanned himself in front of him. Then he shook it on the ground. A person fell out of the fan. When this person fell out, she seemed to be very unaccustomed to the current environment. She was vigilant and frightened for a while. Then she saw Li Yunxin and stared at him without blinking. Then she took 2 steps back. She reached out to grab something in the void, but naturally she couldn't grab anything. After thinking for a while, she looked around as if trying to find 1 or 2 weapons, but naturally she couldn't find anything. Li Yunxin shook his head slightly and ignored her. He turned around and walked out of the house. The woman didn't follow him. Only when Li Yunxin walked to the door of the courtyard did she show half of her face. Li Yunxin. The meaning in her voice was very complicated. Li Yunxin withdrew his hand that was about to push open the wooden door and turned around. The moonlight softly sprinkled on his body and the courtyard, gilding half of the woman's face in the room with silver. He looked at her calmly and didn't say anything. They looked at each other for a while, then the woman said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to leave," Li Yunxin answered. The woman looked at him suspiciously, then looked around. "What do you want to do?" Although it was the same sentence, the meaning was different. Li Yunxin thought for a while and said, "You are already free, Ling Kongzi. When you stayed in my dragon palace, it wasn't because I wanted to imprison you. It was because the situation was complicated and dangerous. If I let you out, you might die. Now that things have been solved and you have become a human, I will set you free." Ling Kongzi, Lu Ling thought for a while seriously and frowned. "Why did you save me?" "Because when I saw you in Dongting, I promised to save you." Lu Ling blinked and raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't know whether she was expressing surprise or disdain. She realized that Li Yunxin seemed to be really not hostile, for the time being. So she slowly walked out from behind the door. Li Yunxin saw that there was a stain on her cheek. The door frame was dirty, and the wall was made of yellow soil mixed with straw. She had to dirty herself by hiding there. Not only her face was dirty, but even her white clothes were dirty. It was only a short time since she came to the real world from the fan, but she was not so clean and new. But Lu Ling didn't realize it. In fact, she had been used to having magic weapons to protect her for a long time. She was always spotless and detached from the secular world. Even if she once killed a disobedient cultivator in the residence of the city of Wei and stepped on him, her feet were still clean. You also rebuilt my body. Her tone was a little strange when she said this. But that insignificant emotion soon passed. She asked again, why did you rebuild my body? It was not my intention. It was someone else who had done it. But if you say it's my credit, it is indeed my credit. Li Yunxin said calmly, your current body is the 6 desires tribulation form created in my dragon palace. 6 desires, it comes from my 6 desires. I could have interrupted this process before. But first, I didn't want to offend a powerful person. Second, my mother is Shangguanyu. Do you know Shangguanyu? Lu Ling frowned and thought for a while. She didn't speak. She became very cautious and careful. Her previous indifference and calmness had all disappeared. Now she was like a frightened child, treating everything with caution. So you don't know. Li Yunxin smiled. To put it simply, my mother has a thin bloodline of the current 2 sages. Naturally, I also have it. This means that I have a close relationship with Daotong. But I don't want this relationship. I have returned some favors to Daotong, including you, and then we will go our separate ways. I am a demon now. Ling Kongzi listened and looked at him in a daze. It seemed that her mind was not as clear and flexible as before since her cultivation had disappeared. She thought for a while and said, demon? But Li Yunxin had already turned around and pushed open the wooden door. Lu Ling hesitated for a while and called him, where are you going? Where is this place? Where are the people of the cave? Li Yunxin halted her steps. He paused, held the door and turned around. This is Green Hill, 10 miles south of the city of Wei. It will be your home from now on. All the people in the city of Wei have died. You will have a hard time in the future. At this point he paused, because she saw a strange expression on Lu Ling's face. She looked around blankly for a moment, then shrank her neck. Then she subconsciously held her arms, frowned and took a step back. A gust of night wind was blowing. Li Yunxin sighed and looked at her. This feeling is called cold. He shook his head again and reached out to the fan. He pulled out a thin red quilt and handed it to her. Lu Ling didn't take it. Li Yunxin threw the quilt on the ground and said, it's from Mount June. It's not an ordinary thing. It can protect you from the cold in winter. He took out a silver wine pot, tore it into pieces and threw it on the quilt. You should know that this is called silver. It's used to buy things. This is 1 tael of silver. Lu Ling looked at him with a confused look. Then she shrank her body again and asked, what does this mean? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and sighed, you haven't realized it yet, huh? Okay, let me tell you. You were dead before but you've already died. Your snow mountain and ocean of chi were destroyed and your body was destroyed. Your spirit was hidden in the bell. This means that your cultivation is gone. Then you should be a ghost cultivator, use your obsession to become a crazy ghost cultivator. But someone reconstructed your body with a method that I don't know, using my 7 emotions and 6 desires to create the tribulation of 6 desires for you. This means that you are the incarnation of desire. You will slowly experience it in the future. But when it comes to cultivation, the method you use to cultivate requires you to abandon your emotions and desires. But your body can't cultivate it all now. So, you are now an ordinary person. As for Daotong, Li Yunxin looked at her sympathetically. I stayed with Kuan Wuzi for a while, reached a certain degree of reconciliation and made some exchanges. During this period we talked about many things, including the life and death of several Emptiness Realm Taoists under his command. However, until he left he didn't mention you. Because right now, to the orthodoxy. Firstly, you have failed. Second, you destroyed so many magic treasures when you failed. If you still had cultivation, maybe he would take you back to the Langya cave abode to interrogate you. But now you are a secular person who can no longer cultivate, and even the step of interrogation can be omitted. The orthodoxy hopes that you can live peacefully in the secular world or die peacefully. Or he doesn't care about you at all. Maybe you will have an adventure. But at least now. Li Yunxin looked at her. No one wants to remember you. Lu Ling stared at him with his mouth agape. He seemed to be able to understand what he was saying, but he was unable to understand it all. Her eyes were flustered and she blinked again and again. Her throat seemed to be stuffed with charcoal, and it was so dry that it seemed to be smoking. After a long time she said a sentence, but even she didn't know if it was what she wanted to say. Here. Then she turned around and looked around. This was a dilapidated courtyard in the wilderness, under the moonlight. This is the best place for you. Because I don't know if you have any concept of this. Li Yunxin looked at her. You are a very beautiful woman. In this era, being a beautiful woman, especially a beautiful woman who doesn't understand many things and has no wealth or power, is a very, very dangerous thing. For secular people, there are many things in this world that are more terrible than death. The pain they suffer includes but is not limited to physical and psychological pain. But there are almost no people around the city of Wei. This is a dead place. People will come later, but it will be a long time later. So during this time, you can first adapt to the life of a secular person. Li Yunxin turned around, walked out of the door and gently pushed the wooden door. I hope you can live longer. This world is actually very interesting. Lu Ling's lips trembled and shouted, "What's interesting? What's interesting?" She stumbled to the door and grabbed Li Yunxin's hand. The emotions in her body that had been suppressed because of the previous loss and helplessness erupted. She hysterically shouted at Li Yunxin, "What else can I do? You must have a way. How can I recultivate?" Recultivate? But Li Yunxin's body was so hard that she couldn't even leave a white mark on his hand even though her nails were bleeding. Li Yunxin raised his hand and shook her off. Her strength was so insignificant to him at this time, as if his hand was just a spider's silk. "You can die." He calmly said, "Die again and become a ghost. Maybe by chance you have a 1 in 10,000 chance to become a ghost cultivator. You can have a try." Lu Ling was stunned. She didn't say anything for a long time. Li Yunxin shook his head, turned around and walked away in the moonlight. If it was Ling Kongzi in the past, she would not hesitate to stab herself in the neck after hearing his words. But now Lu Ling had lost everything, including the pride, calmness and detachment brought by her previous cultivation. It was like being trapped in a swamp. The world always made you more miserable when you were miserable. Chapter 287. Now Li Yunxin has shown everything he wants Shinryu to know. He has the bloodline of the double saints. If Shinryu, the Lord of Demons, wants to do something to Daotong, this bloodline will be a precious resource. He used to fight with the Taoists of Daotong. Almost all of them ended in his victory. He handled the relationship with the enemy in a beautiful way, which means he not only has muscles but also brains. He knows the secret of possession. And he is not alone, the secret comes from Bai Yanjun. Now he has made a final decision with Daotong. He releases his enemy but only gives a little help. This means he is not an emotional person, but he is not a cold-blooded person without any feelings. These should be the qualities that a qualified executor and strategist should have. If the true dragon really wanted to do something big, he needed such a person. In a situation where so many great demons seem to be idiots. Li Yunxin walks along the road to Dongting in the moonlight. She walks slowly. It takes him half an hour to walk a mile, as if he finally has the time to experience some pleasant tranquility after a continuous fierce battle. As a result, the things he did tonight quickly received feedback. He hears people's voices behind him. Judging from the voices, there should be 3 men and they are drunk. The drunken voices of the 3 people soon break the tranquility on the path, and the dirty words reveal a pleasure, they think. They had just found a stunning beauty. They take turns to violate her on the red brocade quilt, kill her, and take away some silver from her hand. These 3 people are the bandits who escaped into the wild forest to avoid being caught by the government some time ago. They heard that the city of Wei has been destroyed and set on fire, so they plan to come back to see if they can find some treasures or fun. They didn't expect to get a surprise on the first night. The 3 of them soon noticed Li Yunxin in front of them, so they lowered their voices. It seemed that after doing something wrong, they instinctively felt that it was better to keep quiet. However, they soon realized that they had the advantage in numbers, so their voices grew louder. They quickened their pace and approached Li Yunxin, as if they were planning to make another fortune. Li Yunxin looked at the fan in his hand. According to the fan, Lu Ling was still in the green hill, he was not dead. The spot of light also disappeared. But the people behind him were not 3 ordinary people who had lost their luster. In fact, there was nothing there. This meant that the 3 people behind him did not exist. They were just little toys created by magic, of course to a great demon like Li Yunxin. This was a test that belonged to Shinryu. Thus, Li Yunxin stopped without hesitation, turned around, and faced the 3 people who were closing in on him. The 3 plain-looking bandits surrounded him in a triangular formation with the smell of alcohol in their mouths. They stared at him fiercely and asked him to hand over his belongings. They also repeated what they did not long ago to make him panic. Was Shinryu testing whether he really didn't care about the beautiful woman in Daotong? Li Yunxin tilted his head. He waved his hand casually. The heads of the 3 bandits who were still chattering and laughing ferociously and proudly flew into the sky at the same time. The headless bodies fell to the ground one after another, spilling blood. After killing the 3 bandits who just killed Lu Ling, Li Yunxin turned his head and looked in the direction of the green hill. But he just looked at it. The next moment he turned around and a cloud suddenly rose under his feet. He went straight to the direction of Dongting. It seemed that he had been ruined by the 3 people and he was no longer in the mood to walk under the moon. He rode on the cloud and soon returned to Mount June. As soon as he landed on the square in front of the central hall, Lu Laodao hurried to greet him, looking very worried. But Li Yunxin smiled. It's been solved. Laodao looked up at the sky. It's only been 3 hours. Did he solve such a monster in the mysterious realm? But Li Yunxin didn't say much but quickly changed the topic. He frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "We may have a big trouble. Hatred told me. Shinryu is on the way here." Laodao was stunned. Then he asked subconsciously, "Shinryu?" "That Shinryu." Li Yunxin could understand his feeling. Shinryu was a legendary existence for him. In fact, many people in the secular world would think that Shinryu was probably just a totem made up by people. Now when he heard that Shinryu is coming, he's stunned, which was already calm. But Lao Dao's expression was his true nature, which was exactly what Li Yunxin wanted. He shook the folding fan a little irritably, and then he saw the light spot representing Shinryu on the fan reappeared, in Dongting. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. Li Yunxin pretended to be worried. Our future will be decided in a few days. Lao Dao finally calmed down, but he was still a little stunned. Future? Yes, future. Li Yunxin sighed. I originally wanted to be a monster and be unrestrained in the world, but I didn't expect to cause a lot of trouble. Now I almost offended several big forces, although it seems to be peaceful now. In fact, it's still a dead end. So if Shinryu is really coming, we'd better submit to him. With the approval of Shinryu, we can be a real big monster and we won't be troubled everywhere. Li Yunxin took a few steps and turned to look at Lu Laodao. What do you think the result will be? Laodao blinked after a while. That, if Shinryu really shows up, can I see it? Li Yunxin was stunned and then sighed. He still overestimated the ability of people in this era to accept this kind of thing. He smiled bitterly, reached out and snapped his fingers in front of Lu Laodao. Oh. Laodao came to himself. There will be many opportunities in the future. He waved his fingers in front of Laodao again. Now help me think of a way. What way? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and then he smiled bitterly. I'm not very clear. Then he glanced at the fan. The spot of light disappeared again. This was a strange phenomenon. When Shinryu was high up in the sky, he could see the spot of light that represented him on the fan. It was dazzling, vast, intimately connected with everything in the world and carried a terrifying power. But the last time it disappeared was when Shinryu cast a spell. He created 3 non-existent bandits to test him. Now it disappeared again. Did this mean that his second test had begun? After a quarter of an hour, Li Yunxin got his answer. First, there was an earth-shattering roar from somewhere in the lake, stirring up huge waves. Although it was nighttime, although it was very far away, Li Yunxin could still see a line of white waves in the distance where the water and the sky met. That was the evil dragon in the lake. He was stunned. Had the evil dragon gone mad? When Su Weng came, the evil dragon was as obedient as a loyal dog. But now that Shinryu was here, it actually went mad? But soon he got his answer. Suddenly there was a sudden downpour in the sky and then a huge figure came crashing down from the sky with a hum. Li Yunxin immediately looked up and saw a body as huge as the evil dragon in the lake. For a moment, he almost thought that Shinryu had revealed his true body and was about to pounce on him. But then he realized that this thing seemed to be dead. Because its huge body was motionless and its head was lowered. Finally, it bent down in a curve in the air. Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat and he grabbed Lu Laodao and dodged. With a loud bang, the huge figure hit the square in front of the middle hall. The bricks and stones used by the Emperor Star Palace were not ordinary. But even so, the huge square was smashed into a deep pit. Lu Laodao stood beside Li Yunxin, stunned. The huge figure on the square was the evil dragon in the lake. Its body exuded a strong fishy smell, and a few small fish fell from its scales and jumped on the ground. The lake water also flowed down from its scales and quickly filled the deep pit. So the small fish found a temporary place to stay and disappeared into the muddy water. But the evil dragon was already dead. It could not be seen where the fatal wound was. It stared at the sky with its big round eyes, and its eyeballs became muddy at a speed visible to the naked eye. Li Yunxin looked around in the night. There was no movement. So he let go of Lu Laodao's hand and jumped on the evil dragon's body. He stepped on its thin scales and walked a few steps to check, but he did not find anyone. He subconsciously wanted to take out his folding fan, but at this time he suddenly saw the middle hall light up. The golden light filled the hall, shining through the windows and doors. It was as if someone had suddenly lit up thousands of lamps in the hall, and the light was as thick as sticky milk. Li Yunxin held his breath and looked into the hall. He did not know when there was another person in the hall. He turned to Lu Laodao and said, "Old Lu, wait for me here." Laodao looked at the evil dragon, and then looked at Li Yunxin and nodded in a daze. He knew that perhaps Shinryu had arrived, but he did not expect it to start with such a scene. As far as he knew, the appearance of a true dragon should be accompanied by rays of light and auspicious clouds, right? Li Yunxin stayed on the evil dragon's body for a while and took a deep breath. Then he jumped down and walked step by step on the stone steps to the door of the hall. Now he could see the appearance of the person in the hall. He raised his eyebrows slightly. It was a woman. This woman was a beautiful woman. It was hard to tell her age from her appearance. She could be described as a slightly mature teenage girl, or a mature woman in her early 20s. She could even be described as a middle-aged woman who had taken good care of herself and looked quite young. This was because of her unique temperament. Although she was beautiful, she had a dignified aura. She did not frown or raise her head, she just calmly sat behind the main seat in the middle of the hall. In his left hand was a colorful poisonous snake that was coiled up into a ball, and his right hand was gently stroking its head. The poisonous snake did not dare to move, as if it was carved out of stone. The woman's hair was combed into the style of flowing cloud phoenix wings. This made her look noble and gorgeous. There were no gold or silver jewelry on her hair, but there were two golden lights on her forehead that shot up to the sky. The two golden lights were slanted upward, and there were countless tiny specks of light that lingered around them. Li Yunxin realized that those were her horns. The golden robe on her body was also bright, like light, but it was tangible. She sat in the middle of the hall, but the golden robe moved without any wind. It was like light or flowing water. This also made her look magical and mystical, as if she was constantly showing off her power and majesty to the world. "This is Shinryu?" Li Yunxin took another deep breath. He had guessed that Shinryu was actually the dragon mother. But when he looked at the person in front of him, he still felt that it was ridiculous. It wasn't that he had any prejudice against women. It was because in this world, it was indeed the world of males. And this Shinryu was a woman. It was hard to imagine how she dominated the world and subdued the demons. But perhaps it was because she was a woman that the demons were in a state of disunity and did not want to pay her any heed. Li Yunxin relaxed a little. But then he realized that he had made a mistake. Men would always lower their guard when they saw a woman. In fact, this was one of the most powerful weapons of women. He knew this, and he shouldn't have made such a mistake. He stopped in front of the hall and looked at the person in the hall seriously. "How should I address you?" Shinryu in human form didn't answer. Instead, she looked at him calmly. Then she leaned back slightly and asked, "Do you know your crime?" Her voice was clear and melodious. But there was an unquestionable majesty in her gentle voice. Up to this point, it was only because she did indeed look like an out-and-out big shot. Her appearance, mannerisms, and voice were indeed befitting of her status. But Li Yunxin couldn't help but frown. He felt that it was strange. But he couldn't tell what was strange. For example, he had heard of many powerful people in his previous world. Some of them had the power to control the basic necessities of millions or even hundreds of millions of people. People were careful to mention their names and images, or even didn't dare to mention them. But when Li Yunxin came into close contact with such people, he would always think, he can be like this too. This meant that, as a name or a character, that person would appear to be incredibly dignified and hold great power. But when they sat in front of you, you would notice that their skin would also have holes. They would also feel nervous, and they would occasionally touch their nose, and they would even sneeze or fart. Countless small details would make the person in front of you seem more alive, creating a subtle sense of intimacy. But now that Li Yunxin met Shinryu, he couldn't experience such a feeling. The Shinryu was too perfect, too dignified. So perfect that she seemed like a symbol or a symbol. Chapter 288. But Li Yunxin thought, perhaps this is the difference between gods and humans. Everything he's seen before was a human. Their lifespan is limited, and they're plagued by illness and death. The only difference between them and a normal person is that they have the authority. But authority isn't spiritual energy or spells. It can change a person's mind, but it can't change a person's body. That should be the case. Because of that, Li Yunxin pretended to hesitate for a while, then showed a hint of panic and surprise on his face. Then he forced himself to calm down. He carefully took 2 steps forward and spoke in a low voice. I don't understand what you're saying. You first intruded into my dojo, then killed the spirit creature in my lake. And now you're accusing me of something? This isn't the demeanor of a Taoist cultivator. Shinryu calmly stared at Li Yunxin for a while, then spoke. If you want to submit to me, then why don't you know what you're doing? Now you've added one more crime to your list. You clearly know it's me, yet you're playing tricks and pretending not to know. But be careful, you're too smart for your own good. Hearing her words, Li Yunxin's face suddenly showed a look of surprise, as if the real dragon had really hit the nail on the head. He stood in the middle of the hall and opened his mouth in panic, as if he wanted to say something. But very quickly Shinryu's gaze became stern, and he lost his composure. He took a deep breath, lowered his head, and bowed deeply with both hands clasped in front of him. Brat, impudent, reckless, and absurd. This brat is guilty. But only. As he said that, he looked up at Shinryu. But Shinryu's expression was emotionless, as if she was unfathomable. Li Yunxin quickly retracted his gaze. He lowered his head, gritted his teeth, and finally gathered his courage. He looked up again, stood up straight, and spoke in a desperate manner. I'm only seeking a way out. I don't want to turn into dust in this world. Shinryu looked at him, then raised his hand to touch the snake in his palm and repeated, Do you know your crimes? Li Yunxin hesitated for a moment, but still looked at Shinryu. I killed the dragon's 9 sons, Chiwen. I am guilty. Shinryu nodded and said slowly, Good. I'll give you a quarter of an hour to explain yourself. Li Yunxin opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. But soon he took a deep breath. It is a fact that I killed Long Jiuzi, there is nothing to excuse. As he said this, he finally saw Shinryu's dignified expression soften a little. It seemed that she was surprised. After a moment of silence, Shinryu said, This is a great crime. Li Yunxin remained silent. Shinryu looked at him for a while and blinked, But I do know that you saved his life again. Although you killed him, now it seems that you should bury the hatchet. Li Yunxin was shocked and stared at Shinryu. How did you? Zhenlong smiled indifferently and said, That 9th son of mine is unbearably stubborn. You gave him a lot of reasons and he was convinced. If it weren't for what you've done, I wouldn't have let you off. Li Yunxin blinked her eyes in a daze. You even know about this? Shinryu smiled slightly and seemed even more mysterious. I also know that you and your second brother are very close friends. So, why didn't you say this? If I didn't know and killed you in anger, wouldn't you become dust? Li Yunxin seemed to be much calmer now. He took a deep breath and bowed to Shinryu again and said, Lord Shinryu's Tao is profound, how could I not know? If I really didn't know, then I shouldn't have known. Heavens will has killed me, Li Yunxin. These things. Let this kid say it himself. First he killed Dragon's son and now he's trying to list his so-called merits. It's unavoidable that he's trying to be clever, and it might make Lord Shinryu even angrier. So, life and death depends on Lord Shinryu's will. Shinryu smiled, You really think of me as heaven's will? Li Yunxin said seriously, Lord Shinryu is the master of the demons, and you control the chi of heaven and earth. It's not wrong to say that it's heaven's will. Very well, very well. Shinryu's expression became more lively. It's been a long time since someone dared to flatter her like this. Or maybe they wanted to do it, but they didn't do it as smoothly as Li Yunxin, making people feel like they're bathing in the spring breeze. A smile appeared on her face and she looked at him. Among my 9 sons, some are brave, some are smart, and some are considerate of the overall situation. But there aren't any who can gather all of them like you. Little 9. I originally thought highly of him, but I didn't know that he's so insensible. Today he met you and suffered a calamity, which can be counted as a disaster for him, but also his good fortune. Maybe in the future, his achievements are still unknown. But. She slowly stopped smiling. Is there anything else you want to say to me? This time Li Yunxin only thought for a while and said, No. Shinryu lowered her head, and used her finger to circle the poisonous snake. For example, Daotong Ling Kongzi? Li Yunxin slightly gritted his teeth. She's already immortal. Shinryu smiled, You let her live. And you also messed up my big plan. I'm making arrangements in Dongting to destroy the prestige of the Taoist orthodoxy. But you drove all the Taoists of Daotong back, and it is said that you are also on good terms with the master of Lengya Cave Abode? Shinryu slowly raised her head. You don't say these things to me. Are you also afraid of flattery? And you let Bai Yunxin and Red Lady go. With my dragon soul. You don't say such a big thing, are you also afraid of flattery? Her tone was not harsh and she was still calm as usual. But it had an unquestionable meaning. The brilliant golden light in the hall rose and fell to Li Yunxin with her tone, as if it was also doing the same. But Li Yunxin didn't panic this time. He even took a step forward, straightened his chest and said, I don't say these things because they are all old things of the past. Shinryu should know that I used to be a rootless duckweed. My parents died and I had no one to rely on. Because of some opportunities I got such a good fortune today, although I think of Immortal Lord, I'm still alone. I don't belong to any force and I don't have any friends to help me. The reason why I got to where I am today is all the result of struggling to survive in the cracks. The ninth young master is a mountain, Daotong is a mountain, Kenzo is a mountain, and Lord Dongting is also a mountain. If I want to live I can't hit the mountain. I will do things that are beneficial to me. I don't care who the other party is. If demons really fight with Daotong and Dongting, I know I can't escape this disaster. So I have to make some schemes, and inadvertently disturb Immortal Lord's big plan. Li Yunxin said this passionately and his voice slowly calmed down, but Immortal Lord must know one thing. When I didn't belong to anyone I could still guard Dongting and didn't let Daotong take away an inch of land from me. This means that my interests and Immortal Lord's interests are the same at that time. Now if I am lucky to get the protection of Immortal Lord, I will do anything for you. Shinryu looks down and smiles. When you talked about Kiwer before, you were so righteous and moral. But now you've laid out your interests in such a blatant way. Are you two different people now? Li Yunxin said seriously, if I can't even see my own interests and needs clearly and dare not to say it, then no matter what I say will anyone dare to believe it? Okay. Shinryu stands up, you are a man who dares to do and take responsibility. So what do you want? Li Yunxin thinks for a while, I want Weishui River. Shinryu laughs, what a big appetite. But after a few steps he says again, okay. I will give you Weishui River. I will give you Weishui River and also give you a title. From now on you will be the Lord of Weishui Chiwen. Li Yunxin breathes a sigh of relief and waits for the next words of the god dragon. But you have to remember I will give you Weishui River. Not a certain section or several sections of Weishui River. Shinryu looks at him with a faint smile. In the past Kiwer was useless. He could only control less than 1 or 2 parts of a surging Weishui River. Now I have given you everything, you can take it all away. If you can't take it away, then there will be no chance. How long do you give me, Immortal Lord? Li Yunxin asks calmly. Weishui River is just a small river. It is not even a hair of 9 oxen among all the water systems in the world. Shinryu thinks for a while. 1 month. 1 month. This Weishui River originates from Taya Mountain in the northeast, flows into the sea at Lonko Gorge in the west, and flows through 6 countries. If you use 1 month, even if this Weishui River belongs to you in name, you will not let me down. 1 month's time is probably not enough to see the entire Weishui River. Li Yunxin says calmly. So if you can do this, then you can be called Lord Dongting. Shinryu smiles. There are profound realm monsters in the world, but not many of them have my title. You are only a true realm monster, and you have such an advantage. How can you convince others without shocking achievements? And if you can really do it, it means that you have determination and perseverance. Then I have another task for you. I have determination and perseverance. Li Yunxin says, what do you want me to do after this? Shinryu smiles, bring back the dragon soul. Bring back the red lady who took away the dragon soul, she should be one of us dragons. At this time, Li Yunxin is really surprised. Because what Shinryu is talking about is exactly what he promised to solve. Even if Bai Yunxin doesn't believe him, Li Yunxin is silent. But Shinryu takes this silence as agreement. She walks 3 steps in front of Li Yunxin and says, let me see your fan. Li Yunxin was slightly stunned and said, Divine Lord, that is where my dragon palace is. Both the palace and the dragon palace are related to the life of a demon. There is an unwritten rule. Demons must obey the demon king and demon general. But if you have a palace, you can't hand it over to others. Because this is the same as handing over half of your cultivation and your life to someone else. Because of this, even if Li Yunxin wants to please and confuse Shinryu, he still has to emphasize this. Even if he can't do anything if Shinryu wants to use force. However, if the true dragon were to say, let's forget about it over there, that would be something he would be extremely happy to see. But the calm and dignified Shinryu only glances at him. I know. Li Yunxin can't say anything else. He is walking on thin ice. Every step he takes is careful. The ice is the approval of Shinryu and a stable future. Below the ice is the abyss of eternal damnation. Any mistake or fluctuation could cause the ice to shatter. Li Yunxin isn't someone who likes a stable life. But that doesn't mean he likes a life where he can be killed at any time. And so, he frowns, takes out a folding fan and hands it to Shinryu. Shinryu doesn't take it. But without any movement, the folding fan flies from Li Yunxin's hand and stops in front of her. Then the folding fan opened with a whoosh, and the spirit map appeared in front of the true dragon. Li Yunxin silently lowers his head, only looking at Shinryu out of the corner of his eye. That is his spirit map. Naturally, he has a way to control it. For example, when he designed the Freemasons' fake Kun Wuxia, he can only make them see him on the fan and not others. In fact, whoever he wants to see can only see that. Although the spirit map's power is far from limited to this, with Li Yunxin's current realm, he can only do so much. But he doesn't know how Shinryu is. This means that all his knowledge is only effective for ordinary people. This ordinary people doesn't mean secular people, but cultivators who haven't reached the Grand Supreme Realm. What his parents said to him, and the difficult and obscure experience in the Jade Scroll of Enlightenment are only applicable to cultivators who are below the Grand Supreme Realm. But Shinryu can almost be called a living god. Li Yunxin doesn't know what kind of extraordinary means she has, and he doesn't know if she can break the restriction he left in the painting and discover the truth. The truth is that he always knew that she is in the sky, and he used this advantage to play with her ruthlessly. That would be a terrible result. He took another risk this time, far more frightening than any other time before. Shinryu stared at the 100 miles of rivers and mountains painting on the fan for a while, and asked him, "This is a spirit map." Li Yunxin hurriedly said, "The godly lord has a sharp eye." "Did you make it?" He respectfully replied, "Yes. I used the power of millions of Yin souls in Wei City to make such a painting. But there probably won't be such a work in the future." Shinryu smiled and shook her head gently. He didn't know whether she didn't care or she didn't know. Then she asked again, "What's the use of this painting?" Li Yunxin was silent for a while, and with a serious and unquestionable tone he said, "The original purpose of making this painting was to seal immortal Yunzi's soul into the painting, and completely cut off any future troubles, because immortal soul is immortal. But later I did find other uses. Since I drew it, I can control the person in the painting to walk around. If someone who doesn't know anything sees the person in the painting, they might think that they can spy on the person's movements. But in fact it's only like this in the painting. Previously, I used this method to deal with the Freemasons in this hall." Li Yunxin smiled faintly. "It's a small trick. But if a small trick is used well, it can be of great use." Chapter 289. After he said this, Shinryu was silent for a while. She looked at him calmly as if waiting for him to continue. Li Yunxin realized that he was faced with a choice, to tell the truth, or to continue to gamble that Shinryu was like all the other cultivators in the world who didn't understand the art of painting, and didn't know the secret behind it. After hesitating for a second, he chose the latter. The latter was more risky but also more profitable. So he stayed silent for a while with Shinryu and then asked, "What else do you want to know, Lord?" Shinryu's eyes slowly became serious. She stared at Li Yunxin. "What I want to hear you won't tell me. You've only picked out these things that you can say to me. You really have guts." Li Yunxin's body tensed up. He held his breath for a while, slowly moved his eyes and lowered his head. "Lord, why do you say that?" Shinryu shook her head slightly. "Sigh. That's human nature. In this world, how could there be a person who could really say everything he knew without holding anything back?" Li Yunxin immediately looked up. "Yes." But he let out a sigh of relief in his heart. It seemed that Shinryu really didn't know the secret behind the spirit painting. What she said just now was just to trick him. This made Li Yunxin feel even more strange. When he first saw Shinryu, he felt that she was perfect and majestic like a god. Even now, he still felt that she couldn't be insulted, but the fear in his heart had decreased a lot, because she actually tested him. Things like testing don't often happen between the superior and the inferior. The more common means for those in a superior position was to order others around. Even threats would be considered as degrading to them. But the method that Shinryu used was testing. Only those who weren't strong enough would test. Moreover, Shinryu repeatedly said that he already knew what she knew, which made Li Yunxin even more confused. He did not know if it was because he was too sensitive. The dragon god could not sense his thoughts and continued, I'll tell you these things today. Tomorrow morning you will go and do as I say. You're a clever boy, I suppose you know what to do and what not to do. Don't disappoint me. Shinryu believed and accepted him. Li Yunxin was relieved, but he was actually a little disappointed. He didn't even know why he was disappointed. Was it because Shinryu wasn't as omnipotent as the legends made him out to be, or was it because this incident was too scary but not dangerous? He felt that a terrible sign had appeared in his heart, and this sign was making it harder and harder for him to settle down in a peaceful life. He had been unsettled in a peaceful life before, and now he was even beginning to feel unsettled in a safe life. Every time he solved a problem he would feel a sense of loss. On one hand, he rejoiced that he had successfully survived and finally dealt with the enemy. On the other hand, he felt a faint sense of disappointment and loss. Perhaps because of this, Li Yunxin hesitated for a moment before speaking. He asked a question that he hadn't figured out yet. Kid, there is still one thing I don't understand. Shinryu was a little surprised that he dared to ask such a question. But she only looked at Li Yunxin and said, "Call yourself minister." Li Yunxin followed her advice and bowed again. "There is one thing I don't understand." "Go ahead." Shinryu turned around. The golden robe on her body fluttered like water waves and flowing lights, as if it was alive. "I know that Shinryu created 9 sons with half of the dragon soul," Li Yunxin said slowly, "but there is a part of the dragon soul in Dongting. What I don't understand is, why did the Lord God do this? If strength and ability are determined by the number of dragon souls, then the current divine Lord only has a quarter of the dragon soul. But Big Brother Cheonyo not only has a quarter of the dragon soul, but also half of the demon's power. Isn't he stronger than the divine dragon?" Shinryu suddenly turned around, and the majesty and calmness on her face almost faded away, showing anger. But she quickly suppressed the emotion in her heart and looked at Li Yunxin with a pair of brilliant golden eyes. "Why, do you think I can't command all the monsters in the world now?" Li Yunxin hurriedly lowered his head. "I don't dare. Just..." He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought, showing a hesitant look. Shinryu looked at him and soon smiled slightly. "You have seen your second brother." "It has nothing to do with my second brother. I'm just worried about the Lord God." "Then you don't have to worry about these things. Just do your own thing." Shinryu paced a few steps in the same place and turned to look at Li Yunxin. After thinking for a while, she suddenly waved her sleeves and turned into a ball of golden light. A voice came from the golden light. "I will take this little monster away. You finish what I asked you to do as soon as possible and bring the dragon soul to Ruoxue to see me. By then there is a bigger thing waiting for you. You can take this." As soon as the voice fell, the golden light suddenly disappeared. The middle hall became dark again. 2 things fell into the hands of Li Yunxin. He glanced at it. In addition to his Dragon Palace folding fan, there was another thing. It seemed to be a piece of dragon scale. When he met Dragon Sun Hatred for the first time in Dongting, Dragon Sun showed this thing to Lord Dongting. It was said that it was a corner of a dragon scale that fell during the battle between the Dragon God and the Golden Rock King. Now he also had a corner in his hand, but it was thin and long like a small dagger. It was pale gold, exuding a faint fluorescent light. Li Yunxin thought for a moment, then used this thing to forcefully stab his palm. He felt a sharp pain. His palm, which was harder than steel, was pierced. This thing was really a dragon scale fragment. At the same time it was also a dragon god token. Li Yunxin stood in the dark and thought for a while, then turned and walked out of the hall. Then he found that the body of the evil dragon that fell on the square in front of the hall had also disappeared. It was probably taken away by Shinryu. Seeing him go out, Lu Laodao came to see him. Li Yunxin unfolded the folding fan and gently fanned it, whispering, "He has left." Laodao thought for a while and asked cautiously, "Is he really from Shinryu?" "Yes." Li Yunxin answered concisely. Laodao was annoyed. "If I was more courageous I would have seen the real god. How does Shinryu look like?" Li Yunxin thought for a while. "Solemn and calm, unpredictable. If I were to say something insulting and blasphemous, it sounds like my mother." Laodao opened his mouth. "Ah?" Then he saw Li Yunxin blink quickly in the dark. The old Taoist immediately understood. This meant that Li Yunxin's words to him were all acting. This was a little tacit understanding between the two of them. It was difficult for outsiders to know. There was no pattern to this kind of thing. It could be a look, a body movement, or just a sentence or a word. The intimacy between the two of them made them understand each other's intentions. Before Lu Taoist met Li Yunxin, he was a person who mingled in the streets and was good at reading people's words and expressions. Then, after receiving Li Yunxin's teachings, his ability to read people became more sophisticated and ruthless. Thus, without any hesitation, he continued, "Brother Xen, you rarely talk about your mother." Lao Dao started this topic, so Li Yunxin said matter-of-factly, "My mother, you still don't know my mother's background. She was the only bloodline of the twin sages in this world. But now that she's gone, I'm the only bloodline of the twin sages in this world." Li Yunxin said in a low voice, "Maybe she knew it herself or maybe she didn't, but it's the bloodline. I've never been close to my mother since I was a child, and I like my father more. Because she's also dignified and calm, just like Shinryu, so there's less family affection. Therefore there should be less familial love." Li Yunxin sighed slightly, and her sigh faded with the wind. Lao Dao blinked. He didn't know whether what Li Yunxin said was true or false or half-true. "So I regretted it later." Li Yunxin seemed a little depressed, and he became sad on such a night. "I wasn't close to her when she was alive, and I always felt that life was very long. We're both cultivators and we live longer than ordinary people. I feel that we'll have a lot of time to communicate with each other in the future. But the tree wants to be quiet, but the wind doesn't stop. The child wants to be raised, but his parents won't be around." Li Yunxin was silent for a while. "There won't be a chance after that." He fell silent after saying this. Lao Dao stayed silent with him for a while and then asked softly, "So, Shinryu told you to think of her?" Li Yunxin didn't answer directly. Instead, he waved his fan and paced, "Now I can be considered a dragon's son. Just old Lu, you know. There are many things in this world. I originally wanted to look at the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch. Shinryu, the dragon god, a godlike existence. But when I look at her, I think of my mother. I'll think like that, but others won't." He laughed at himself. "I almost did something stupid just now." Lao Dao was surprised. "What did Brother Xn say?" "I was impulsive just now, so I asked Shinryu that she only has a quarter of the dragon soul in her body. But Long de Chionyo also has a quarter of the dragon soul. I know I shouldn't have asked this. But I was stupid. In that moment I don't know why my brain was in a knot and I asked the question." Li Yunxin shook his head. Then Shinryu ran away. "What do you think she will think? Because she was impulsive and excited, she thought she saw her mother and was confused because she cared about her? Even a fool wouldn't believe such a lame excuse." He slowly walked to the steps in front of the temple and sat down, staring at the lake in the dark. "But it's like that." He waved his fan in disappointment, as if he was trying to drive away all the troubles and worries in his heart. So he saw the spot of light in the fan move slightly. Shinryu didn't leave immediately like she said. In fact, she was still somewhere nearby, listening to the conversation between Li Yunxin and Lu Laodao. Laodao thought for a while, then walked to Li Yunxin's side to look at his expression. Then he stretched out a hand and put it on Li Yunxin's shoulder. "Brother Xan really didn't think this through. That Shinryu is a godlike existence, how could she have the love we have? But Brother Xan also told me before about the pros and cons. In Daotong, we won't be anyone important. Moreover, the Taoists are all stone-hearted, and they are bound by rules and regulations, so they won't be happy. The Freemasonry has a grudge against you for killing your parents, so if you don't join Shinryu, where else can you join? I only hope that Shinryu doesn't treat you with sincerity, just doesn't suspect you. In this chaotic world we must have a place to rely on. The relationship between the ruler and the minister. If we do things seriously, there will be a day when everything goes according to our wishes. It's just that I can't have those weak thoughts from before anymore." Li Yunxin nodded silently and said in a low voice, "I'm just sad for a while. After tonight I'll be fine. I know this is not good." After saying these words he stood up. After another quarter of an hour, he looked at the fan in his hand and sighed. "That's enough." The old Taoist instinctively raised his head to look at the sky, and then looked around. Then he walked a few steps to Li Yunxin and said in a low voice, "What Brother Xian said is true and what is false?" After waiting for a while, when Li Yunxin didn't answer, he frowned and said, "Not good." This was the first time he objected to what Li Yunxin did, even if it was only in such a tone. Li Yunxin turned around and looked at him. "Don't you think it's good to use the matter of parents to plot against someone? The cultivators of Daotong may not care about this kind of thing. But death is the most important thing," Lao Dao said solemnly. "Brother Xn, don't you have a better way?" Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. The sadness he showed just now seemed to be completely gone. But he said, "I understand what you're thinking. But if I say that's the truth, Or, it's also half true. Su Wen once said that I deliberately killed the daughter of the Yin family so that Inspector Yin could fall into the trap. Old Lu, do you think it's true? Lao Dao hesitated for a moment and answered honestly, this I don't know. Then I don't know either, Li Yunxin said seriously. Lao Dao was silent for a while and then sighed, Brother Xen, it's good that you don't become those cold-hearted Taoists. Everyone says you're like this like that, but I think I know it. There are some things you don't do. This is better than most people in this world. Li Yunxin smiled, yes. At this time the sky was about to brighten. The sky in the east turned white, as if a corner of the dark curtain of the night had been lifted, revealing some hope or something else. Usually, although the morning was slightly cool, it could only be called cool. But on this dawn, Lu Laodao felt cold. Even though he had practiced the divine heart law taught to him by Li Yunxin, he still tightened his clothes. Then he looked at the sky, narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment, look, today is the beginning of autumn. Solar terms were a magical thing. Clearly the previous morning people only wore a single layer of clothing, but today they had to wear an extra layer. Spring and autumn in the Qin kingdom were short, and winter and summer were long. Once autumn entered, the weather would quickly turn cold. In about 2 months the first snow would fall. Li Yunxin turned his head to look northwest. Bai Yunxin had taken Hongyang in that direction. After a while, we'll have to go north to find the dragon soul, he said in a low voice. It'll get cold even faster. Chapter 290. Meet with Dragon Flower, smoke fills the night wind. The fire in the city of Wei finally goes out after half a month. Then heavy snow starts to fall from the sky. The snow wasn't real snow, it was because the magic array was about to stop operating without anyone to protect it. As a result, the spiritual aura and the true fire leaked out, igniting a small part of the nearby forest. The area that was set ablaze was precisely the forest that had been set ablaze during the battle between Ling Kongzi and Bai Yunxin. They experienced a new life at the end of summer, and then suffered a disaster at the beginning of autumn. White ashes from the burning plants are scattered all over the area around the city of Wei, as if winter comes early. At this moment, Li Yunxin is standing on a peak among the stone forest mountains, which is like a sharp sword, looking at the Pitfall Mountain a few miles away. The stone forest mountains are made up of many peaks like this, and the Pitfall Mountain is the tallest and most majestic one, in the past. Because the Pitfall Mountain is not so tall now. Li Yunxin is slightly surprised when he sees the residence of the evil king. Half of the Pitfall Mountain has collapsed. It looks like a broken fong, and the upper part is lying on the Gobi Desert full of gravel, which looks very miserable. This should be the result of the fight between the 9th young master who possessed hatred and the evil king that night. Even with the protection of the magic circle, the monsters in the mysterious realm still made the evil king suffer a terrible loss. Li Yunxin feels that half of the blame will be put on him. But he is not very worried. After all, he is now a person who can use the evil king's power. 2 days ago he arranged things in Dongting and set off for the Pitfall Mountain. But not long ago he met Hatred who went back, but it is not appropriate to say that he went back. After all, it was only the 9th young master who went, that day. Now Hatred and Li Yunxin are standing side by side on the top of the mountain, looking at the Pitfall Mountain together. So this is the current situation. Hatred had been talking to Li Yunxin for a quarter of an hour, and now he was making a final conclusion. Back then, when the Shinryu subdued all the demons in the world, the situation was stabilized. Although she was a top-notch expert, the world was so big and she was alone. That's why she split us 9 to help her guard the world. You are a smart person, you should know that this is not a good idea. We are demons, not those secular monarchs. Josie carries the prestige of the dragon god and has his own fiefdom and territory. As time went on, he would be unable to get rid of his tail. Even the royal family of the mortal world had no kinship, so how much kinship could the royal family of the demons have? But the dragons can be distant, but they can't fight among themselves. Once there is discord among the dragons, the demons in the world will be disturbed. That's why we've been borrowing power all these years, borrowing the power of the world. As long as the demons have their own agendas, Shinryu will still need us Kyuko. As long as we don't exceed the limits of what Shinryu can tolerate, then we'll be safer. You should know this as well. He paused and looked at Li Yunxin. Why didn't you say anything? Second brother, I helped you before. Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and looked at Pitfall Mountain again and finally smiled. I understand. It's always been like this since ancient times. When the secular people look at the emperor, they think that everything in the world belongs to the emperor, and that the emperor has absolute power. But in reality, it's always a power struggle between the central government and the local governments, from the beginning of a dynasty to the end of a dynasty. Similarly, Shinryu doesn't have absolute power and influence. You're borrowing power and she's also borrowing power from you. It's a dangerous balance between the two of you. Then second brother, Li Yunxin turned to look at him. You want me to learn from you and become the demon king of an independent territory? Hatred hesitated for a moment and frowned at him. From your tone, you don't want to do that. I want to, but I can't. Li Yunxin turned his head and sighed. He had been standing here with Hatred for half an hour, and during that time he didn't see any demons coming in or out of Pitfall Mountain. The battle that night had caused a lot of rubble to collapse, and now the rubble and dirt were blocking the entrance of the cave, but no one came to clean it up. Li Yunxin didn't fully understand the Diablo, but he knew that this wasn't his personality. Then, was it because he was so heavily injured that he couldn't gather any more demons? If that was the case, the Octave Treasure ancient scroll in his hand, Wu Song beating kitty cat, should be owned by the virtuous. Then he continued, second brother, think about it. When you were in theft and grew up, the world was just beginning to stabilize. Shinryu needed your help more than any other time in the past 1 or 2,000 years, so we allowed you to grow, and even hoped that you could grow as fast as possible. But how is it now? The demon world had been stable for 1 or 2,000 years. For the demons it wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. The current situation could not be said to be stable, but it could not be said to be in imminent danger. At a time like this, when many people don't even know who I am, I'm starting to stir up trouble and go against my only backer. Isn't that like eating arsenic? Hatred blinked. You're tired of living. Li Yunxin sighed. That's why your previous method won't work on me. Second brother wants me to join him? Now is not a good time. But since you've helped me before, I can at least promise that I won't make things difficult for you in the future. Hatred looked at Li Yunxin suspiciously. Are you telling the truth? You're not that kind of person, do you just want to be a loyal dog? Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. No, not a loyal dog. It was a ferocious dog. Whoever Shinryu wants me to bite, I'll bite. I'm fiercer than anyone, crueler than anyone. Do you know why I'm doing this? Hatred felt that he didn't really understand this Li Yunxin. He gradually realized that this guy's mind was much more than he expected. He was a strange and dangerous demon. It was difficult to use common sense to understand him. Thus, you see, I said, tell me about it. I think the reason why I was accepted by Shinryu is because of 2 reasons. Li Yunxin raised one finger. The first reason is because I know how to become Dragon Son, which is called Dragon Vein. But that alone is not enough. Shinryu can easily force me to reveal my secret and then throw me away. But the reason why they treat me with respect and even give me a title is because I'm very strong. Li Yunxin raised a second finger. This is the second reason. My strength isn't from words, it's from killing. She knows that I'm someone with high combat ability, so rather than throwing me away, it's better to make use of me. These 2 reasons are the reason why I can stand on top of this mountain and talk to you. Without any of them, I'd be a corpse right now. Second brother, isn't it because of the same reason that you're willing to help me? To put it bluntly, in this world, if you don't have strength, you don't need to talk about anything. Li Yunxin paused and turned to look at him seriously. But strength isn't just based on how high your realm is or how tough your body is. He pointed at his head. Having a brain is also strength, and knowing how to take advantage of others is strength. My realm isn't as high as yours, and my foundation isn't as deep as yours. That's why I need to be a vicious dog. What's wrong with being a vicious dog? For example, Shinryu gave me a month to settle the Wei River. Why did she do that? It's not because she wants to test my strength. When she gave me this test, she had already recognized my strength. She did this just to make use of my power to frighten the disobedient demons near the Wei River again. In the past, the 9th young master was in theft in the Wei River, but the Taoist field was only a small part of the city of Wei. This is a slap to the face of Shinryu and a challenge to her authority. I don't know why she didn't have time to deal with this place before, but now I know that she wants me to bite those demons. Maybe she set up a trap in Dongting to attract Daotong so that Daotong can bite those demons? Then I'm going to bite them. Li Yunxin laughed happily. I have the Dragon God token in my hand, and the Wei River is my fief. Whoever doesn't leave, I'll kill them. If I kill them all, Shinryu will have to take half of the blame for me. As for my other half, they dare not mess with me. Because messing with me means messing with Shinryu. So, second brother, you see, I became a vicious dog, got my own fief and got a lot of followers. The more I kill, the more people are afraid of me, and the more Shinryu is satisfied with and trusts me. Isn't it better than making a fortune in silence? Hatred listened to Li Yunxin's words in one breath, and he was silent for a moment. Then he frowned slightly, but most of it is just your speculation. Li Yunxin laughed. A lot of things are just my speculations. But I'm a smart person, so my speculation is always accurate. Then he said, is there anything else, second brother? If not, I'm going to mess with people. Hatred said, what about the future? Who knows what will happen in the future? Until the day we become two saints in Shinryu, we are just duckweeds drifting with the current. Li Yunxin said this and jumped off the cliff. Take care, second brother. There is no need to distinguish between friend and foe in many things. Benefits are eternal. This newly promoted dragon son Li Yunxin's figure disappeared before his voice faded. The mysterious realm demon Hatred stood alone at the top of the mountain and looked in the direction he went. His expression calmed down. Then he smiled. Good. Good guy. The area in front of the Pitfall Mountain was a desolate scene. When Li Yunxin came here 20 days ago, it was bustling. Various monster kings came to attend the blood and flesh feast. Dozens of small monsters were welcoming the guests, and so was snake spirit Qi Duanjin. But now the pile of rocks in front of the door was emitting a strong stench, and flies were buzzing around it like a thick black fog. When Li Yunxin walked over, the flies dispersed so he could see the scene below. Many broken limbs were buried in the pile of rocks, and occasionally half a rotten head was exposed. From the looks of it, these belonged to the monster kings and their small monsters. That night, the 9th young master brought about a terrifying massacre, and none of the monster kings who came to attend the feast were spared. Now their corpses were piled up here, unattended. He also saw some hyenas living in this desert in 2s and 3s staring at him from afar. 2 or 3 of them had severed limbs in their mouths. When demons were alive, they ate human flesh, and after death they were eaten by the hyenas. It was a kind of cycle. Li Yunxin looked for a while, then walked into the Pitfall Mountain. He didn't encounter any resistance or strange phenomenon. It seemed that the restrictions on the Pitfall Mountain had indeed disappeared. The cave leading into the mountain was also filled with traces of flesh and blood. Li Yunxin frowned slightly, walked all the way to the cliff inside the mountain, looked down and found that it wasn't completely dark inside. There was a lonely bonfire in the middle of the square where all the demons were dancing. A tall figure sat beside the bonfire, leaning against a large rock that fell from above. Although this Pitfall Mountain was broken in half, the top was still covered, and only the middle and lower parts of the mountain were hollow. The bonfire's light only illuminated a small area, like a bean in the endless darkness. Li Yunxin thought for a while, then jumped down and landed beside the bonfire. The half-lying person beside the bonfire was indeed the evil king. But the evil king was no longer as mighty as before. One of his teeth was broken, and the pair of horns on his head was completely broken. The armor on his body was also broken, hanging on his body in pieces. The armor of a demon like him wasn't an external object, but the shell of his true body. Since the armor couldn't be repaired, it meant that his true body was seriously damaged. In layman's terms, he was about to die. He was also a profound realm demon, only one realm lower than hatred, and he had the support of the formation that had been in operation for many years. But the result of a night of battle was like this. The difference between the realms above the profound realm was indeed terrifying. The evil king raised his head with some difficulty to look at Li Yunxin, who was between the light and darkness, and then lowered his head again. After a while he panted a few times and said, "Wow. You're not dead. Someone told me a long time ago that wherever you go, you'll be schemed against. Now it seems that it's true. I don't have long to live. What are you doing here?" Li Yunxin took a step forward and stood in front of the evil king, looking at him. "Now I'm the son of Shinryu, and Shinryu told me to come and take back the Wei River. I had thought that in this part of the Qing kingdom, your power was the greatest, so I had to start with you. Who knew you'd become like this? Really? Happy." He took another step forward and sat down beside the bonfire. "Give me that ancient scroll. That way after you die, I'll only borrow your body and won't do anything else to you." The evil king panted a few more times, his chest rising and falling like a bellows. "Don't give it to you? Then I'll refine your soul into a bell. Every time I touch the bell." As he spoke, Li Yunxin took out a bell from his sleeve. This bell was given to him by the Red Lady in the wooden pavilion outside the Sanhiku Dragon King Temple, made from the soul of the temple attendant. Every time the bell rings, you'll have to endure the pain of your soul being hurt. It's a direct hit to the soul that can't be resisted, and I guarantee that you'll suffer for hundreds or thousands of years. Li Yunxin stretched out his hand and flicked the bell. Just like this. The evil king closed his eyes and smiled. Then he opened them again. I'm not afraid of your methods. I'm just too lazy to meddle. Then he used his chin to point at his chest. Here. Come, take it. Chapter 291. Li Yunxin looked at his chest. In the dim, flickering light of the fire, he saw a corner of the painting between the broken armor. It was probably because the evil king had removed the iron plate outside and kept the painting in his chest. He stood up and took out a few talismans from his sleeve. The talismans fell on evil king's hands and feet, turned into golden light and entered his body. Then he raised his hand and drew a few strokes in the air. He used the art of painting to create a seal and locked evil king's meridians and acupoints. Only then did she walk to his side, staring at him warily as she reached out to touch his chest. Evil king sneered weakly. What? Li Yunxin's expression didn't change as she fumbled around in his arms. I've seen too many idiots who seek death. For example, they don't attack the enemy after they are knocked down and talk to him with their back turned. I'm not that kind of person. Then his hand paused for a moment and he took out the painting from evil king's chest. He carefully took 2 or 3 steps back and looked at it. He confirmed that it was indeed the art saint's authentic work and one of the Octave Treasure's ancient scrolls. No one in the world could copy this painting. Even Li Yunxin was shocked by the complicated flow of qi in it. This painting seemed to be connected with everything in the world and at the same time, it became a part of the natural world. He did not expect it to be so easy to draw. So after a moment of silence, he turned to look at Evil King. Do you have any other wishes? Evil King looked weaker and weaker. He looked up. Do you have any good intentions? Li Yunxin looked at him. You did not cause any trouble, so I have a good impression of you now. Besides, if I leave here, I will probably have to fight my way along the Wei River. So now is a good chance. If you have any unresolved grudges or enemies, you can tell me all of them. Perhaps I will avenge you in passing. Evil King listened to his words and laughed. Then he coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. Perhaps it was the final radiance of a setting sun, but after coughing he actually spoke clearly and smoothly. You want me to tell you, are there any other great demons nearby? Sigh. Evil King sighed. Speaking of which, you schemed against me. I should have wanted you to be pierced by arrows. But as luck would have it, there's someone whom this king hates even more than I hate you even more. Li Yunxin looked at him. Then tell me, maybe your luck is good and I die with him? But he didn't find the joke funny at all. Xie Wang didn't pay him any attention. He only forcefully straightened his body, roused his spirits and continued, if we go any further south, we will be out of the Qin kingdom. The Wei River left the Qin kingdom and reached the Yu kingdom. The state of Yu is a narrow one, and it occupies a section of the Wei River. He squinted at Li Yunxin. It's a Taoist priest who calls himself a Kenzo cultivator. His Taoist name is Yang Jianzi. That Taoist priest is not ordinary. Saying this, he stared at Li Yunxin in silence for a while. Li Yunxin also waited for a while. Who knew that this wait would never come? Evil King's cold laughter was stuck in his throat for a while, as if his breath was stuck in his throat. Or perhaps some shattered pieces of internal organs in his body surged up to his throat and blocked his windpipe. But he didn't have the strength to raise his hand or move his body. Thus, he stared at Li Yunxin from the corner of his eyes, as if he wanted him to give him a quick death, to avoid this suffocating pain. But Li Yunxin slowly took 2 steps back, putting some distance between him and Evil King. He calmly looked at the Demon King who was about to die and slightly spread out his hands. I'm sorry. If it was someone else, I would give them a quick death at this time. But you are different. He only said this one sentence and didn't say anything else. He put the Octadic Treasure's ancient scroll into his sleeve with his left hand and shook his right hand. With a clatter, a green iron chain was shaken out. The iron chain hung down, swaying slightly. It was waiting to capture the Demon King's soul after his death. But in reality, Li Yunxin didn't want to torture him. He still had a lot of things to do and there was no need to waste time here. But this Evil King was different. He needed to observe the whole process of his death. Because the Evil King seemed to be created by the art saint. Li Yunxin also painted people. So far, he had painted many people who didn't belong to this world. The one he spent the most effort on and was the most successful was the body of Sanhua that was destroyed not long ago. That body belonged to a dragon lady in another world. But there was a problem with his creations. they couldn't escape their own limitations. For example, the dragon lady was born as a foreign body with hard scales. Then her scales could resist attacks and slashes. But in the other world, the dragon lady had many other skills. For example, she could transform into a fire dragon and spit out dragon breath, but she didn't bring those skills to this world. Here, her body was restricted by the rules of this world and was just a body. Li Yunxin used to think that all painted people would look like this. Until he saw the evil king and his 7 sons, in the other world he was familiar with, the abilities of these people also appeared in this world. This meant, there was a way. There was a way to make the bodies and characters he painted stronger, and even to break through the limits of this world. But the problem was that he didn't know how to do it. Right now, the great demon created by the art saint, the evil king, was dying. So Li Yunxin needed to carefully observe this process in order to get what he wanted. Suffocating to death was a long and painful process. As a profound realm demon, the evil king definitely didn't expect his final ending to be like this. But what Li Yunxin wanted to see was whether the evil king had a soul. The dragon lady that Mrs. Sanhua possessed didn't have a soul, it was just a body. But now that the evil king had his own consciousness, Li Yunxin didn't know what was inside his body. Was it possessed by another soul like Sanhua, or did it have its own soul? Time passed bit by bit, the bonfire on the ground slowly died down, and the light became dim. Li Yunxin reached out his hand and drew a few strokes in the air. Then an oil lamp took shape in the air, emitting a warm light. The evil king's face gradually turned pale in the light, and his expression gradually stiffened. Blood accumulated at the corner of his mouth, like a crab out of water. After another 15 minutes, his eyes suddenly widened and he stopped moving. Li Yunxin immediately held his breath and focused, opened the third eye with his supernatural power, and stared at the evil king's body. He really saw the soul. This soul looked exactly like the evil king. He floated up from the body as if he was a little confused. Soon he regained his senses and looked up to see Li Yunxin. How could Li Yunxin let go of the soul of a profound realm demon? He shook the iron chain in his hand and wrapped it around the evil king's body. Unexpectedly, the evil king's soul chuckled and said with a sharp ear-piercing voice, "What can you do to me?" After saying this, he turned around and fled underground. And the iron chain that Li Yunxin used to bind the soul was like an ordinary object, passing straight through the evil king's body. He was slightly stunned, but he wasn't very surprised, because he was already prepared for something strange to happen. If the art saint's creation was like an ordinary cultivator or demon after death, it would be unusual instead. Now he knew the first thing, the evil king had his own soul. But the dragon lady that he created didn't have it. The evil king's soul could burrow underground, and so could Li Yunxin. He was originally a yin spirit that transformed into dragon son. He could also do what the soul could do. But the reason why he rarely used this power was because it was really not a good feeling. The walls, stones, and plants that you passed through were all stuffed into your body. The feeling of being alive but filled with other things was one of the worst experiences he had ever had. But at this moment he couldn't care so much. The evil king was burrowing underground. Below was the bottomless pit that bound the giant skeleton. Li Yunxin turned into a yin spirit and chased after it and soon reappeared. He was in the vast space under the Pitfall Mountain. When he first woke up here, he was surrounded by endless darkness and endless silence. But this time he was slightly surprised when he entered here again. He could see the giant skeleton. It was glowing, as if there were many fireflies. No, it was countless thin, glowing snake-like things swimming on the giant skeleton. There were so many of them that it looked like the giant skeleton was growing muscles like flowing water, although it was only a thin layer of membrane. The pale green glow around its body made it look like it was made of steel or bronze. At this moment, it looked like a king that had been sleeping underground for thousands of years, and was trying to break free. Such a strange scene finally stunned Li Yunxin for a short while. Not because of any other reason but because this thing seemed to be suppressed by the art saint and guarded by the evil king. Now it seemed to be coming back to life. After seeing the various means that the art saint left in the world, Li Yunxin was more and more afraid to speculate about anything related to the saint. The saint's power and mystery were beyond his imagination. Even though he had not seen it, it had already shocked him more than the dragon god. And what kind of thing was suppressed by the art saint here? While he was stunned, the evil king's soul had already flown to the front of the skeleton. He was originally quite tall. But now that he was hovering in front of the skeleton's head, this tall evil king could only fill one of the skeleton's eye sockets. The evil king's soul laughed loudly. You little brat, what do you think I am thinking? Do you know what this is? Li Yunxin hesitated for a while and gave up the idea of chasing after it. There were many things that could be risked, but this thing in front of him had too many unknown possibilities. Rushing over at this time was not risking, but rash. Once it died, it would be stupid and not exciting. He stopped at a distance. He first looked around, found a way out, and then said in a low voice, "What is it?" The evil king's soul laughed sinisterly again. "Have you heard of ancient devil?" Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. But he still remained calm. Evil king's brain is also muddled after death? You once told me that the pangolin dug through the pitfall mountain and released a primitive ancient devil. You and old demon Fulu went through untold hardships to defeat the primitive ancient devil and suppress it under the pitfall mountain. Aren't you talking about that ancient devil? The evil king laughed out loud again. 15 minutes ago he was still a demon that was about to die, but 15 minutes later he had become a soul that was full of energy. But he did not know what his obsession was. But if he did not talk about the obsession, he seemed to be happier and more open-minded than when he was alive. Hey, that ancient devil is not this ancient devil. The evil king laughed again. This ancient devil is a demon seed born in the primitive world, a powerhouse that existed before the chaos was formed. Even the celestial beings in the sky feared this demon seed, so they scattered it and suppressed it between heaven and earth. The thing behind me is one of the ancient devil's remains. You little brat, hey, there is a path to heaven but you refuse to take it, there is no door to hell but you come. Wait for this king to possess the remains of this ancient demon. First I'll kill you, then I'll kill that Yazi. Finally I'll kill all the divine dragons in the dragon clan. Only then will I be able to vent the hatred in my heart. Li Yunxin felt that he knew what the evil king's soul's obsession was. But compared to the information revealed by the evil king, this matter seemed insignificant. Was what the evil king said true? The ancient devil he mentioned was one of the ancient devil and true devil that Bai Yanjun told him about. Let's not ask how he knew about this, but if it was true, does it mean that there are other similar skeletons being suppressed in other parts of this world? But the evil king's words were not enough to vent his anger. It seemed that he still wanted to vent out all the resentment he had accumulated over the years. Guard the pitfall mountain? Trapped me for so many years. He flew around in the air angrily, like a balloon that was slowly deflating. His eyes rolled around, sometimes staring at Li Yunxin, sometimes looking at the skeleton, as if he was looking at a treasure. Then he said, "Thanks to you, hatred." After a fierce battle with him, he broke through the pitfall mountain's restriction, and even destroyed the chains that bound the skeleton in this bottomless pit. Only then did this king discover that the skeleton of the ancient demon had come back to life. The ancient devil skeleton that even the celestial beings fear. If I possessed it, wouldn't it be easy to kill you? Why didn't I think of this earlier? Yes. Li Yunxin looked at him with a slight frown and suddenly said, "Why didn't you think of this earlier?" When he said this, the evil king's soul suddenly froze. He was dumbfounded and stopped in midair, staring straight into the void as if he was thinking about something. He was, after all, a soul. It was something left behind after the soul was damaged. Some memories were lost. Chapter 292. The amnesiac soul froze in the air for a long time, and then his face showed an impatient and angry expression. It seemed that he could not remember the reason why he did not think of this earlier. This matter made him very unhappy and could not let go of it. If it was an ordinary person, he would have calmed down after thinking about it carefully. But the soul had an obsession, and his temperament was also very different from ordinary people. The evil king anxiously thought for a while. Suddenly he raised his eyebrows and shouted angrily, "You are annoying." Noisy. I can't remember. So what? After he shouted, it seemed that he was afraid that Li Yunxin would ask him something else and lose his momentum. He immediately turned around and rushed into the eye socket. He was not far away from the skeleton, so Li Yunxin could not stop him. When he pounced on it again, the skeleton seemed to have sensed something as well. The gossamer threads swimming on the skeleton were like thousands of venomous snakes, and they stood up at the same time. They bloomed into a fluorescent chrysanthemum, as if they were waiting for the evil king to throw himself at them. So Li Yunxin saw a strange scene. The evil king's soul was suddenly stretched. It seemed that the chrysanthemum had a strong attraction. First, the head was sucked into a long and thin line, and then the body was pulled over. This change made the evil king's face look distorted, as if he was suffering great pain. But it seemed that it was the truth. The evil king's distorted face suddenly widened his eyes. He suddenly let out a sharp howl, like a desperate person who thought he saw a little hope, but soon realized that it was still despair. He reached out a hand to Li Yunxin. "Ah, how can this be?" But soon, his voice was also sucked in. As soon as he finished speaking, his entire soul disappeared in those gossamer threads. The open gossamer threads suddenly closed. A clear halo spread from the spot where the evil king's soul was swallowed, but it quickly faded. It seemed that the evil king's soul had become nutrients, but the nutrients only nourished a small area near the skeleton's eye socket. Soon the gossamer threads stopped wriggling and swimming. It was like a group of small snakes entering a short period of dormancy after eating. The light on the skeleton slowly dimmed until it was completely hidden in the darkness. Li Yunxin watched the whole process with his mouth agape. He sucked in a breath of cold air. It wasn't because the soul of a profound realm great demon was far from enough to satisfy this thing's appetite. It wasn't because it was said that this skeleton was only one of the many bones of an ancient devil. It was also not because the evil king's soul seemed to have discovered something incredibly terrifying before it was completely absorbed. It was because of this thing, he absorbed the soul. Cultivators and demons could scatter their souls, and through arrays they could also refine the spiritual energy and grievances in their souls. However, absorbing souls seemed to be an ability that only the black and white Yamalords possessed. Previously, Li Yunxin was a little skeptical about what the evil king said about the skeleton being a part of the ancient devil. But after seeing the scene in front of him, his doubts lessened. It was very difficult to destroy the soul of a real person, but this thing could absorb the soul of a profound realm demon, the evil king, without any effort. Moreover, a demon soul of the evil king's level could only cause a small ripple on the skeleton's body. How terrifying was this thing when it was still alive? Although the skeleton was no longer glowing and hidden in the darkness. But Li Yunxin still felt his body slightly numb, as if there was an unknown danger coming from all directions. It also felt like there was a pair of eyes staring at him in the darkness. They were lurking under the ground, breathing and pulsing, as if they were ready to pounce at any time. A heavy feeling of oppression gripped his heart. He felt his chest tighten and his head numb. He couldn't breathe. So Li Yunxin quickly realized, this was coercion. Just like the dragons could make many demons feel real coercion, now this skeleton also made him feel coercion. He didn't want to stay here any longer. First, he took out a talisman, using the light to look at the skeleton. The last time he saw this thing, it was deathly pale. It looked like a skeleton that had been completely dried up. But now it had turned greenish-black. A layer of muscle-like membrane covered the surface of the skeleton. It was probably the thin snake-like thing that he saw before. Its posture didn't change, but it gave people the feeling that it was alive. It was silently bound in this incomparably wide underground space, still staring at the ground with its head lowered. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He flew back for a distance and then returned to the ground. The bonfire on the ground had already been extinguished, and it was also dark. Li Yunxin also didn't want to stay in this darkness and flew out of the cave. He saw those buzzing flies, packs of wild dogs, and the broken limbs and bodies in the piles of dirt and stones, and felt a little better. At least here there was sunlight and smell, instead of only endless darkness. He already realized that he seemed to have made a big trouble. He told Hatred to fight with the evil king and destroy the seal of the Pitfall Mountain. Then the evil king gave him the octave ancient scroll and threw it into the skeleton. At this point, the seal on the skeleton seemed to be useless. What would happen next? The evil king didn't tell him how to use the octave ancient scroll to suppress the skeleton. Even worse, Bai Yanjun didn't appear at this time. Li Yunxin really wanted to know what the two of them were busy with. But, for something like this to happen at this time, does it mean that to Bai Yanjun this isn't a big deal? Or are they not that powerful and haven't noticed it yet? He thought for a while, then flew to the top of the Pitfall Mountain and looked around. In fact, no matter how he thought about it, he didn't have any good ideas. He still had to do what he needed to do before, to take control of the Wei River. Shinryu gave him a month's time and now 15 days had passed. He used the first 15 days to make some plans, understand some situations and settle some matters. In the next 15 days he needed to get down to business. But in reality, even if he had a month's time, it would still be very difficult to subdue all the demons along the way, so he needed them to come to his aid or surrender. Li Yunxin sighed slightly, then rose to the sky and waved his hand, flattening the top of the Pitfall Mountain. Then he started to draw on that flat piece of land. He was now in the true realm and could be considered a top expert. The number of cultivators and demons in the world could be counted in the hundreds of thousands or even millions. But those above the true realm could only be counted in the hundreds or thousands. Looking at the entire world, he was indeed an out-and-out great expert. So when he drew a formation, the atmosphere was different from before. What he drew now was the 8 Kings Ghost Suppressing Diagram. This diagram was originally used to suppress evil, but now he was using it on the Pitfall Mountain. He didn't expect this formation to completely suppress the skeleton in the Pitfall Mountain and the bottomless pit, but he wanted to use it to warn him in case something happens. He used 15 minutes to complete the formation, so the remaining half of the spiritual energy around the Pitfall Mountain was mobilized. The spiritual energy from all directions gathered at the spot where he stood, quickly forming a new formation that covered the entire mountain. But because the spiritual energy from all directions was being mobilized by him, suddenly, a flying sword came whistling from the sky and stabbed into the ground right in front of him. Chapter 293. Li Yunxin was taken aback and looked down the Pitfall Mountain in disbelief. This disbelief wasn't because he didn't know who sent the flying sword. Quite the opposite, he already knew. When he left the Pitfall Mountain, he saw a small demon heading his way. At the time, Li Yunxin only thought it was a small demon that came to see if there were any benefits, so he didn't take it to heart. He was a true realm demon, he didn't have time to care about small fries. But now, the small demon sent out a flying sword and stuck it in the ground in front of him. What kind of audacity is this? Li Yunxin paused for a moment, then walked to the edge of the Pitfall Mountain and looked down. Only half of the Pitfall Mountain was left, but it was still a few hundred meters high. Even with his superior eyesight, he couldn't see very clearly. He only saw the figure of the small demon standing at the foot of the mountain looking up, as if it was trying to see if its flying sword had any effect. It was a small demon that hadn't learned how to fly, not yet at Transcendent Realm. Li Yunxin glanced at it, then went back to look at the flying sword. The flying sword was very deep in the ground before, but now it was trembling as if it wanted to leave the ground. But it was stuck in the flat ground that Li Yunxin used to set up the formation. With a wave of his hand, he shaved off this piece of land and used his spiritual power to make the land firm and tough. Now that the flying sword was stuck in the ground, it would be hard to escape. Li Yunxin carefully looked at the sword and found it familiar. It was a thin sword, the blade was only 2 fingers wide. The shiny white blade didn't have any patterns, but it also wasn't rusted. The hilt was long, it could be held with both hands, and there was a thick hemp rope wrapped around the hilt. A few months ago, 2 Kenzo swordsmen were chasing after him, they were wielding a sword like this. But now, this sword that should belong to the Kenzo was in the hands of a small demon, and this small demon could control a flying sword. This meant that this demon knew the Tao of the Kenzo, and practiced it systematically. Demons were wild creatures of the world, they did not understand the ethics of the human world. Regardless of whether it was learning to read or write or learning the heavenly will technique, it was much more difficult than learning for humans. However, not only did this demon learn it, but it also mastered it. This meant that it was definitely not self-taught, it must have been a systematic master-disciple education. Li Yunxin immediately thought of a name, Yang Zhenzi. Before Xia Wang died, he said that the person he hated the most was Yang Zhenzi, who lived in the Yu Kingdom to the south of the Qin Kingdom. There was the word, sword, in his name, and there was also the word, Z behind it, just like all the cultivators in the world. Could it be a human? Was it someone who knew the will of the sky technique and passed it on to the demons? Damn it. Kenzo and Dao Tong would never tolerate such a thing, right? He had a sudden longing for the world in which he had lived. For example, what was happening right now? He was in the Qin Kingdom. Yang Zhenzi was in the neighboring country of Yu, and he was a great demon king. A person of this level, such a distance. If he could use some kind of tool, he could casually type a few characters and search for a lot of relevant information. Perhaps he would even know what he looked like. But in this era he really did not know anything. The people of this era, cultivators and demons, may have been used to this kind of life, but Li Yunxin always felt it was strange and inconceivable. Just like the people of this era, it was difficult for them to understand the frightening degree of information asymmetry, as deeply as he did. He reached out and grabbed the sword on the top of the mountain and pulled it out. The thin sword vibrated even more violently in his hand, as if it was going out of control. Li Yunxin used his qi and spiritual power to flick the blade, creating a gap. The sword immediately stopped moving. Then, Li Yunxin jumped down from the Pitfall Mountain and flew for a while in the air, landing a few feet behind the small demon. The small demon's eyesight was not as good as his, and it could not see more than a few hundred meters away. Therefore, it was completely unaware that a true realm demon was eyeing it. Instead, it walked back and forth at the bottom of the mountain with its head raised, as if it saw that the flying sword had stopped moving and wanted to find a way up the mountain to take a look. This small demon had a strange appearance. It wore a green Taoist robe and looked like a human cultivator. But its head was not a human's but a dog's or a wolf's. Considering that it was a demon, it should be a wolf. Both of its legs were wolf's legs, and its hands had 5 fingers, but they were covered with thick hair. Behind the Taoist robe was a tail. The demon seemed to be very mindful of its tail, and from time to time pulled it down as if it wanted to hide it. Li Yunxin stared at it for a while, then suddenly laughed. Because he thought of a word? Pretending to be a dog. He was 2 feet behind the demon, holding the thin sword and laughing. The demon's ears suddenly twitched and it immediately turned around. Seeing Li Yunxin, it was a bit surprised at first, then its eyes fell on the thin sword in his hand, and its expression changed. It had a wolf's head, so it was difficult to see any expression. But now it was like an angry dog or wolf, baring its teeth and scrunching up its face. It even made a whining sound, clearly trying to scare people. After such a ferocious incident, he spoke in human language again. "Where are you, a Taoist priest? How dare you take my sword?" Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You're quite bold, you demon. You think I'm a Taoist, so why don't you run? You haven't even reached the transcendent stage of cultivation. Aren't you afraid I'll kill you?" The demon laughed strangely. "You don't know what's good for you, you wild Taoist. Haven't you heard of the Sword Palace? I'm a Taoist of the Sword Palace. What can you do to me?" Li Yunxin immediately realized that this wolf demon had a history and identity, and not a demon from the Qin kingdom. Because from his tone, this Sword Palace had a history, but in the Qin kingdom, Li Yunxin had never heard of such a thing. This was like a pillow sent to him when he was sleepy. Thus, he smiled and walked over with his sword behind his back. The wolf demon didn't know what he was going to do, but he seemed to care about his image and didn't plan on running. However, he also didn't plan on making the first move because Li Yunxin had taken his flying sword, which showed that his power was extraordinary. Just as he hesitated for a moment, Li Yunxin had already walked in front of him and raised his sword. He used the back of the sword to slap the wolf demon to the ground. Li Yunxin's movements were fast and powerful. In front of him, the wolf demon was like a child without any power to resist. He fell down stiffly and took a while to slowly come to his senses. Just as he was about to jump up, with a clang, his thin sword was stabbed into the side of his face, almost cutting off his nose. Then he heard Li Yunxin say darkly, "Tell me about your Sword Palace." The wolf demon appeared very surprised, as if he hadn't expected something like this to happen. Regarding his surprise, Li Yunxin was also surprised. This demon didn't seem like a demon at all. He was more like a human than a human. She would care about her image and hesitate when he approached her. This meant that his mind was more rational than emotional. When encountering something, his rational mind told him to think, "Will I lose momentum? Will I lose face? Maybe that person is just bluffing." Instead of being as simple and direct as a real demon or beast, this was a threat. Then he would charge. What kind of system and education could make a demon like this, and even erase his nature? If it were an ordinary demon, wild and hard to tame, he would certainly ask Li Yunxin to spend some more time talking, or even break his legs and pull out his intestines. But this wolf demon was also different. He first tried to get up, but his nose was almost cut off. He immediately stopped struggling and obediently lay on the ground with his face on the ground. While talking about his Sword Palace, he also made threats. "I am the master of the plain monastery of the Sword Palace. How dare you treat I like this? Disgraceful. Disgraceful. Do you know the Sword Palace of the Yu Kingdom? The master of the Sword Palace is called the Yang Sword Master. He is a high cultivator of the Kenzo. He came to the Yu Kingdom to teach demons. How dare you destroy my flying sword? Seeking your own destruction. Seeking your own destruction." As the wolf demon spoke, he glanced sideways at the crack on his flying sword. If this flying sword was truly the sword he had refined according to the Kenzo method, then it was indeed destroyed. If he wanted to repair it, he would have to pour in a matrix and spiritual energy again. This wasn't something any cultivator could do. Although his words were angry, he seemed to know that Li Yunxin didn't talk much, but his actions were ruthless. He was a powerful character. Thus, he still said, "The master of the Sword Palace was born of a sword seed, and his cultivation is mysterious. The power of the Sword Palace is greater. Ah, have you heard of the imperial advisor of the Qin Kingdom? Our master is the imperial advisor of the Qin kingdom. How dare you destroy my flying sword? Unforgivable. Unforgivable. Speaking of this, Li Yunxin kicked him. You are the master of the plain monastery of the Sword Palace. Where is the plain monastery? At the border between the Yu kingdom and the Qin kingdom? The wolf demon chuckled. Yes. There are hundreds of disciples in my monastery, and they will come to save me soon. Li Yunxin didn't pay attention to this kind of nonsense. He thought for a moment and asked, So, since your master is the imperial advisor and the Sword Palace sounds powerful, then every city in the Yu kingdom has your monastery? The wolf demon nodded again. Yes. You have provoked me today, which is a big problem. If you know your mistake and can change, then return my flying sword. Perhaps I can be magnanimous and let bygones be bygones. The wolf demon seemed to like to use some mysterious words. This made his words sound even stranger. But Li Yunxin had already stepped on his body, not letting him turn around. He then organized his thoughts. From the details revealed by the wolf demon's words, the power of the Sword Palace seemed to be huge and strangely huge. Regardless of whether the wolf demon's statement that every city has a Taoist temple of the Sword Palace was true, based on the demon's behavior, Li Yunxin was inclined to believe it. Moreover, the young Jinzi who gave birth to the sword seed was the state preceptor of the state of Yu. As far as he knew, many countries had imperial advisors. This imperial advisor could be a real Daotong or Kenzo cultivator. Or he could be a famous wild Taoist in the country. For example, the imperial advisor of the Qin kingdom was a great painter. But if the imperial advisor of the Yu kingdom was Yang Jianzi, if he was a demon, the Daotong and Kenzo would not sit by and watch demons control a country. If he was a cultivator, the Daotong and Kenzo would not sit by and watch him teach demons. This matter was really strange. Li Yunxin originally wanted to kill one or two big demons and take something from them to make something for himself. But now the curiosity in his bones was overflowing again. He found that this Yang Jianzi of the Yu kingdom was a little interesting. Because of this mood, the feeling of oppression and uneasiness that arose after seeing the skeleton underground gradually dissipated. He was happy again, and even in a good mood, he bent down and stared at the wolf demon's yellow eyes, asking kindly, So, what realm is your master in? Why did you come to the Pitfall Mountain? The wolf demon saw him change his expression and was stunned for a moment. Then he felt that the other was timid after hearing his master's name, so he squinted his eyes and wrinkled his nose. My master is a high cultivator in the real realm. Do you know? Why did I come here? This evil king had a disagreement with my master in the early years. I heard that the Pitfall Mountain was destroyed by someone, and that even the evil king was dying, so I came to investigate. Now I know it's true. This stone forest mountain with a circumference of hundreds of miles will be under the control of our Sword Palace. You don't know what's good for you. Don't you know that once I report this matter, it will be a great achievement? In the future I will be appointed as the commander of this stone forest mountain. The wolf demon was talking excitedly at first, as if he could do whatever he wanted in the world. But as he spoke, he gradually realized that something was wrong, and his voice slowly became softer. In the end, he stopped talking and only stared at Li Yunxin with his round eyes for a while. Then, he glanced sideways at the severed limbs buried in the pile of rocks not far away. His two furry ears suddenly pressed down and he stammered, Could it be that you? Pitfall Mountain. As an honest person, Li Yunxin didn't want to lie to this wolf demon. He smiled coldly and said, The evil king died in my hands. So when you attacked me with that sword just now, didn't you think about this? The wolf demon pressed his ears and lowered his head even more. I saw the spiritual energy around the Pitfall Mountain move again. I thought the restriction in the mountain was activated by itself, so I attacked the eye of the formation to test it. Li Yunxin smiled and rubbed his furry head and said gently, Good. Now tell me a few sword techniques passed down in your sword palace. Previously, when he spoke gently, the wolf demon thought that he was afraid and wanted to admit defeat. But after hearing Li Yunxin say, The evil king died in my hands, he realized that this guy could be very scary. Therefore, when he heard his gentle words, he felt that it was even more frightening than his cold tone. Who knew if he would suddenly change his face and tear him apart? So he thought for a long time before saying, Sword techniques? I don't remember very clearly. I only remember 2 or 3. What? He stammered and mumbled 2 or 3 sentences, then said that he couldn't remember any more. But Li Yunxin knew that he just didn't want to say it. Moreover, these 2 or 3 sentences were deliberately mixed up and made mistakes to coax him. However, if a person could change the appearance of a matter to deceive others, it meant that he was well versed in the matter. Li Yunxin heard the wolf demon recite 2 or 3 sentences of the sword technique, and found that the parts that he deliberately made mistakes were the key points. If these details were mixed up, no one would be able to practice it successfully. So he knew, it was indeed the divine heart technique. What a daring young Jianzi. Chapter 294. Li Yunxin thought for a while, and the wolf demon felt even more uneasy. He was afraid that this person would suddenly kill him with a sword. These guys were the most abominable. He didn't know the name of the sword palace, so he didn't care. If he was killed, wouldn't he die a wrongful death? But what he worried about didn't happen. Li Yunxin suddenly smiled more kindly, the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing 2 rows of neat snow-white teeth. He reached out and rubbed the hairy head of the wolf demon. Let me ask you again. Is your palace master very famous in this generation? The wolf demon was about to speak when he heard him add, I'm not talking about small fish like you. I'm talking about the Grand Monster Kings. How is your palace master's reputation among the Grand Monster Kings? The wolf demon looked at Li Yunxin carefully and said, Of course, very famous. Which of the monster kings near the Yu Kingdom doesn't respect my palace master? Then why haven't I heard of him? The wolf demon thought, I haven't heard of you either, but naturally he didn't dare to say it. He only said, Probably because you are far away. My king, you are, Wei River Dragon King. Li Yunxin looked at him. Have you heard of Wei River Dragon King? The wolf demon thought for a while and widened his eyes. But soon he shook his head like a rattled drum. No. Then you have heard of him. Li Yunxin picked him up and stared at him. So, the Wei River Dragon King you heard of is the one who has 9 sons of the dragon, but has no magical powers, and even his Taoist field has been forcibly occupied by various monster kings? The wolf demon didn't know what to say. He only felt that this guy could read his mind and knew what he was thinking. Li Yunxin smiled and put him down. You're so silly and cute. Well, now take me to your Taoist temple. You can tell me other things on the way. The wolf demon stared blankly for a while again. But Li Yunxin had already swept him up into the sky with a wave of her sleeve, and brought him flying south on a cloud and riding the fog. This demon had probably never tried to fly in the air. As soon as he was in the air, he shouted and screamed, wishing that he could cover his eyes with his hands, and almost dropped the rapier in his hand. Li Yunxin didn't care whether he was afraid of heights or not. Instead, he took this opportunity to interrogate him. The monster wolf naturally hemmed and hawed and only said some unimportant things. However, in front of Li Yunxin, his thoughts were even more transparent than a puddle of clear water. In just an hour's time, most of them had been dug out. It was no wonder that Li Yunxin didn't know much about the situation in the Yu Kingdom. This was because the Yu state was a small country, only the size of a prefecture in the Daqing state. Next to the Yu Kingdom were a few small kingdoms. Squeezed together, they were about half the size of the kingdom of Qing. In Li Yunxin's era of advanced information, many people didn't know how many black-skinned human countries there were in another impoverished continent. Not to mention that far away they didn't even know much about the small countries in the northwest of the country he was in, much less in this era. The Yu state was in the mountains and normally didn't have much contact with other countries. At this time, production was extremely underdeveloped, and they didn't need any international trade to be self-sufficient, so the monarch of the Yu state was even happier not to have contact with other people and only huddled in the mountains. The Yu state was poor and barren, and its products were not abundant. The strange things that happened in such a relatively isolated environment that surprised Li Yunxin could also be considered as something that happened for a reason. However, the reason might be a bit more complicated. For example, Yang Jianzi seemed to be the imperial advisor of the Yu state. As for whether he was a human or a demon, it wasn't clear. The information obtained from the wolf demon showed that he had already lived for 1,000 years. With this kind of lifespan, if he was a human cultivator, he should be close to the realm of indifference. But he clearly didn't have such a profound cultivation, and he seemed to be in the real realm. This meant that he was either a person with a unique method or a demon. In reality, the latter was more likely. And this Yang Jianzi seemed to be doing what Li Yunxin had originally planned to do. He gathered a large number of demons with low cultivation in the Yu state and established an organization called the Sword Palace. Yang Jianzi passed on the way of the sword, and wanted those demons to cultivate with him. Then he built Taoist temples in various places and had his disciples preside over them. They lived in human cities. This world was a place where humans and demons lived together. But the living together that Li Yunxin knew before was on a macro level. But in the U state, demons appeared in the marketplace and lived together with humans. From the wolf demon's description, they seemed to get along quite well. At least that was what the wolf demon called Wolf Taoist thought. Demons in the U state were originally the same as demons in other countries. Some showed their divinity in exchange for the power of wishes, and some ate humans and harmed people to confuse the world. But since they were incorporated into the Sword Palace 1,000 years ago, such things have been much less. Now, according to the Wolf Taoist's words, he was also a respected cultivator in the Rong city of the U state. Hearing this, Li Yunxin realized that things must be more complicated. Humans and demons lived in the same city, and they could live in harmony when the demons were powerful. Only a ghost would believe it. His original plan was to get a little wacken. A little was relative to the wacken needed for the Lingtu on his folding fan. When he was in Dongting, he got a lot of convenience because of this Lingtu, so he knew that it was really a good tool for strategizing. He really wanted to draw not only the surroundings of the city of Wei into the Lingtu, but also the entire Wei River Valley. If he wanted to be bolder and wilder, what if he wanted to include the whole world in it? But that was an unreachable goal after all. Things had to be done little by little. In the city of Wei, he used the power of wishes of millions of ghosts to form an array. At that time he was still in the transcendent state. Now he has become an immortal Jinren. He may need less wacken to draw a Lingtu, but it is still far from what he can do alone. Reiki between heaven and earth is everywhere, but it is thin. If he wanted to use a trick, there was a cruel and brutal way to do it. Or he can use a lot of ghosts to form an array, or he can steal other people's wacken. Along the Wei River there are so many monster kings occupying the Taoist field that should belong to him, and he is ordered by Shinryu to recover the Wei River. In this kind of situation, there couldn't be a better opportunity than to start a massacre and seize by force and trickery. Shinryu will not restrict him at this critical moment, and Daotong Kenzo will probably be happy to see the internal strife of demons. He is a free man for the time being. Therefore, when he heard that the master of the Sword Palace, Yang Jianzi, is powerful, he really wanted to meet him. Of course, the main purpose of this meeting is to kill him and refine his soul into wacken, so that the Lingtu on his fan can expand further. But now that he knows that Yang Jianzi has created a harmonious society between humans and demons in the state of Yu, his interest in him is not limited to killing him. A few days ago he said that he wants to create a little demon protection association to gather some small fries. But in the blink of an eye he found out that someone has already stolen his business, and it has been for more than 1,000 years. How can he tolerate this? He said that the wolf Taoist was dragged by Li Yunxin to the plains of Rong City in the state of Yu. He said some words in the sky, intending to scare Li Yunxin away and get rid of this jinx. Who knew that after the other party learned more about the Sword Palace, not only was he not afraid, he became even more interested. The wolf Taoist complained incessantly in his heart, thinking, he has also heard of the so-called Wei River Dragon King, but only heard. It is said that he is a dragon son who is in the state of perfection, and is not favored by Shinryu. Logically, the entire Wei River should be his training ground, but it has been divided by others. Just from this point, it is obvious that he is not a character, so who cares about him? Besides, there is also the Pitfall Mountain in the middle. But now, looking at this guy who calls himself Wei River Dragon King, he does not look like the rumored demon at all. The wolf Taoist thought that this guy looks temperamental. Maybe he is some great demon who used the name of the Dragon Son to cause trouble. But why did he have to run into him? In another quarter of an hour he can already see the outline of Rong City in the distance. This Rong City is built along the river, and is also called Big and Small Cities. The river it is built on is called Rong River. When the city was built, a big city was built on the east side of the river, and then a small city was built on the west side. But as time passed, the population slowly increased, and the big and small cities of the ancient times were included in the larger city, and many of the city walls were torn down. The wolf Taoist's plain monastery is in the small city. At this moment he can already vaguely see the wide square in front of the monastery. The demon was even more anxious and did not bother to cover his eyes. He only said to Li Yunxin, "You really want to go to my place? What I said is true. Even if you want to cause trouble, I am afraid you will not get any benefits in this Rong City. Be careful not to lose your life." But Li Yunxin just grinned at him. "I like danger and excitement, and I like to see people in trouble." After saying this he stopped in the air, riding on the cloud. "But look at you, are you afraid that I will kill you and pretend to be you to harm people?" The wolf Taoist blinked and was about to say something, Li Yunxin had already raised his hand, and threw a sword into his hand. Then I will give you a treasure so that you can be at ease. This Li Yunxin's words and actions are not according to common sense. The wolf Taoist only felt his hand sink, and a sword appeared in front of him out of nowhere. When he looked at the sword again he gasped, "It is really a treasure sword. It is a small sword. Including the hilt, it is only as long as an adult man's forearm. But the blade is wider than his thin sword, and the sword body is thicker. The bright sword body is densely covered with feather patterns. Under the sunlight, the feather patterns seem to flow on the sword body. In fact, they are really flowing. But the feather patterns are not the patterns left by fine steel after repeated folding and forging, but are all formed by the talisman of Daotong. This thing was collected by Li Yunxin when he was in the city of Wei. That day when he fought with Yunzi, the Taoist in the true state used a great nether formation made of 36 spiritual children holding swords to protect his body. After he killed Yunzi, he took all his treasures except the treasure mirror of arcane light, and the talisman of the great nether formation, which is this small sword. If activated by Daotong's secret method, this sword can also transform into 36 spiritual children to form a formation. But it is not a formation and only used as a magic weapon to kill enemies. It is also indestructible and extremely sharp. This is a magic weapon of the Taoist in the true state. For demons, it is a rare treasure, not to mention this wolf demon whose cultivation has not reached the transcendent state. The wolf Taoist held this magic weapon, looked at the treasure, and then looked at Li Yunxin, really not knowing what he is planning. But Li Yunxin smiled and reached out to rub his head. "So you took this treasure of mine and let me stay in your temple for a while. Come, let me teach you. Inject your Reiki into this sword. Be careful, just follow these talismans. Yes, do you feel anything?" As he spoke, he reached out to the wolf Taoist's pulse, forced out his Reiki, and put it into the sword without any explanation. The wolf Taoist was not willing, but how could he fight against a great demon in the true state? When his arm went numb, he was already subdued by Li Yunxin, and could only watch as Li Yunxin inject his Reiki into the sword. Soon he felt his body was emptied, as if his Reiki was sucked away by the talismans on the sword. But Li Yunxin did not stop and only said to himself, "Look, like this, you left a mark on the formation on the sword. Although you can't activate the magic circle on the sword, you've attached your name to the sword. In the future, when someone with a high level of cultivation obtains this sword and carefully examines it, what do you think will happen?" The wolf Taoist certainly did not know, and could only stare at him, feeling that he was about to become an empty bag. Only then did Li Yunxin let him go and threw the sword to him. "First, you'll find the mark of immortal Daotong on it. You'll know that this is Daotong's magic weapon. And it's a rare treasure, others won't easily give it to you. When your palace master sees this thing, he'll probably praise it. Then you'll find your mark. Oh, that's incredible. Who would give you this thing? There must be something going on between you and the person who gave you this thing." Li Yunxin spread out his hands. "So tell me, are you secretly colluding with Daotong to do something shameful?" The wolf Taoist was stunned for a while and then he understood. He immediately held the sword and shouted, "How can Palace Master believe this kind of thing? He won't believe it." Li Yunxin smiled. "Right? He probably won't believe it. But he'll always feel uncomfortable. For a small fish like you, once the big shots feel uncomfortable, your future will be over. Who will give you important things to do?" Hearing his words, the wolf Taoist felt that something was wrong. But his brain really could not figure out what the problem was, and he could only stare blankly again. Li Yunxin patted his shoulder. "So be good. I'm going to Chengdu to do something and I won't give you any trouble. I'll leave after I'm done and this treasure is yours. Isn't that great?" After a long time, the wolf Taoist asked suspiciously, "Are you telling the truth?" Li Yunxin blinked. "I'm not a liar." Chapter 295. But regardless of whether Li Yunxin was an honest and reliable young man or a liar, Taoist Wolf could only accept the reality for the time being. He felt that he might have run into bad luck. He wanted to make a great contribution, but he ended up encountering such a jinx. He did not know whether he should be happy about getting the sword or worried about being entangled by this person. But Li Yunxin did not care about his feelings at all. After saying that, he rushed down with Taoist Wolf. In the blink of an eye, they had landed in the backyard of the Pingyuan Monastery. From the sky, he saw the layout of the Pingyuan Monastery. It was a luxurious courtyard with 4 entrances. In front of the front hall was a wide square paved with blue stones. There were some figures on the square, probably the Taoist priest who cleaned the monastery. Behind the hall was a garden with flowers and trees, clean and refreshing. It was very similar to the courtyard of Lu Laodao's Dragon King Temple. Beyond that was the residence, which was piled up with sundries. Behind the residence was a small courtyard, which was covered by a dense canopy of trees. Li Yunxin and Taoist Wolf landed in this backyard. As soon as he stood still, he was slightly surprised. The backyard was actually a vegetable garden. There were vegetables growing in the garden. They were growing well and it was time to harvest them. There was a chicken coop in the south. Several hens with a flock of chicks were digging on the ground. Seeing the two of them land, they were startled and ran around the yard, flapping their wings and trying to climb up the wall. But the backyard's wall was high and they could not fly up. Li Yunxin turned to look at Taoist Wolf. Your families? Taoist Wolf was stunned. Ah, but soon he said, are they still young? If the king wants blood. As he said this, he squinted at the chickens in his yard, looking nervous again, as if he was afraid that Li Yunxin would grab one and tear it apart. But he guessed wrong about Li Yunxin's thoughts. Li Yunxin stared at his wolf face for a long time and frowned. Was this thing really a demon? A demon that grew vegetables and raised chickens in his backyard? Or could it be that the demons of the Yu Kingdom had really become so worldly? He harbored such doubts but did not voice them out. Instead, under Taoist Wolf's uneasy gaze, he walked around the backyard and looked around. He hadn't felt this way in a long time. When he first arrived in the city of Wei, he stayed at Lu Laodao's Dragon King Temple. At that time, his state was low, and his ocean of qi and mountain of snow was sealed. So, he lived a happy life like an ordinary person, although he found joy in hardship. He and Lu Laodao ate together, drank wine at night and admired the moon. During the day he would wander the streets and alleys, occasionally flirting with pretty girls and chatting with them. Later on, things happened one after another and he lived like a savage. He didn't have the chance to satisfy his appetite, so he could only eat the food prepared in the Dragon Palace. Although he had the body of a Yin god demon, and his need for food was not as strong as that of humans, but in his original era, many people ate not only to fill their stomachs, but also to satisfy their appetite. In this world, what kind of enjoyment was more convenient, fast and approachable than good food? Therefore, after suffering these days, when he saw the scene in the yard again, a kind of comfortable tiredness suddenly soaked his mind. Li Yunxin leaned against the thin bamboo fence of the vegetable garden and looked at the lush green vegetables for a while. He turned to look at Taoist Wolf and sighed slightly. I don't eat your chicken, but I eat something else. Do you have any good food in Chengdu? Get some for me. Taoist Wolf didn't know if he had an illusion. This demon who called himself Wei River Dragon King suddenly had a gentle expression on his face. He really looked like a human. If he hadn't seen this person's means, he would have thought he was some rich young master living in Chengdu. But soon he shivered in his heart, thinking of the scene when he gave him the sword in the sky. Didn't he also have a gentle smile on his face? For a moment he was shocked, thinking that this guy might be up to no good again. He asked carefully, Your Majesty, what do you want to eat? 3 animals? Or fresh meat? I know there's a kind of pufferfish in Rong River, the meat is the most tender. After fishing it out alive and cutting open its belly? Li Yunxin frowned. You mean in Chengdu you don't have crystal pork trotters, white sauce, vegetable oil fried 3 shreds, spicy beef, tofu with shrimp, drunken meatballs, braised cold mushrooms and so on? Taoist Wolf was stunned for a while, staring with a pair of yellow eyes. Yes. Then eat these. Li Yunxin took 2 steps. Are there any good restaurants in the city? Take me there. I can also see your world of humans and demons on the way. Taoist Wolf seemed to be still in a daze. After thinking for a while, he said blankly, Mu Nanju. Li Yunxin's eyes lit up. Does your country also have this? Then he laughed. Let's go. He took a few steps to the front yard, then suddenly stopped. He stared at Taoist Wolf with bright eyes. Oh, this is your territory. So I'm warning you in advance, don't cause trouble. He turned his hand and took out a small bell from his sleeve, holding it up for Taoist Wolf to see. Look at this. TSK. It's refined from a living soul, a vicious method. If you raise your hand and touch it, you'll directly poke its soul, causing unbearable pain. Then he laughed and pointed at Taoist Wolf. You're naughty, so I'll also refine you into this bell. Old Wolf hurriedly shrunk his head, chanting a peace incantation in his heart, hoping that this jinx would quickly finish his business and leave. Li Yunxin walked in front with his hands clasped behind his back, like a master, while Old Wolf led him from the side like a cautious attendant. They first passed through the middle hall of the house. There was nothing special here, just like an ordinary house. He saw 2 praying mats, probably used by the wolf demon to meditate and exhale. After passing the front yard and entering the middle hall, he saw a statue of a female deity in the hall. There was no memorial tablet in front of it, so he couldn't tell what kind of deity it was. There were also 2 demons in the hall, also with wolf or dog heads, wearing short green clothes, fiddling with the candles on the table in front of the deity statue. Seeing Li Yunxin, Taoist wolf was stunned. He hurriedly waved his hand at them. Back off, back off. The 2 demons shrunk their heads, turned around and walked into the side hall. They also looked like little Taoist children in ordinary Taoist temples. So he walked to the door of the front hall, stood under the corridor and looked at the square. There were also more than 10 demons in the square, but they weren't all wolf or dog-headed demons. There was a pig-headed demon among them. The other one had orange-yellow fur. Looking at its face, it was actually half a fox. These demons were either practicing their martial arts or sweeping the courtyard. They were wearing short green clothes and basking in the sun, looking somewhat lazy and otherworldly. Li Yunxin stood and watched for a while, then turned his head and asked, "Where did these demons come from?" There weren't many demons of Yin deity in this world, compared to humans. It was rare to see 1 or 2 demons in a big city like the city of Wei, which had a population of hundreds of thousands. If there were 5 or 6 of them in the wilderness within 100 miles, it would be a disaster. But there were more than 10 half-human-shaped demons in the Pingyuan Temple of Chengdu. It was really strange. Taoist wolf thought for a while, then said, "Many of them came to join because of its reputation. If there are those who came to join us, we will take them in and teach them how to control their wild nature." "Oh," Li Yunxin faintly said, not knowing whether to believe it or not. After watching for a while, he continued walking. He went straight through the crowd of demons. Like before, Taoist wolf ordered the demons with demon aura to retreat. But Li Yunxin noticed that some demons looked at him fiercely, as if Taoist wolf hadn't taught them well. Just like this, he walked out of the Pingyuan Temple and into the streets of Chengdu. It might not be appropriate to call it a street. At this time, the streets were only small alleys in Li Yunxin's eyes. The few main streets in the city of Wei were barely acceptable to him, but in Chengdu they could already be called narrow. A road could probably allow a carriage and 3 or 4 people to pass side by side. The road was also a dirt road full of potholes. But there were lush trees along the road. The dense shade of the trees covered the sky above the road, leaving only spots of afternoon sunshine, which was a bit wild. But the houses on both sides of the road slightly surprised Li Yunxin, because they were built quite sturdy. There were rivers flowing between the city of Wei and Chengdu, and there were also forests around. So most of the houses were made of wood, which was convenient to get materials. The rich people in the city of Wei liked open and majestic courtyards, and the doors and windows were big and open, with exquisite hollowed patterns. Ordinary people also had big windows. If they didn't want to use oiled paper or cloth, they would leave them open, and in winter they would close the windows. But that way it was not very ventilated. Every winter people in the city would suffocate, because they lit a fire to keep warm. However, the houses in Chengdu he saw now were different from those in the city of Wei. Few people opened their windows to one side of the street. Even if they did, it was a low window. If the people inside the window wanted to look out, they probably had to lower their bodies and kneel on the ground. And the small window was only as wide as 2 palms, barely ventilated. But there must be a door. But it was also low and narrow. The door was thick, and most people's door frames were made of stone instead of wood. In this era of underdeveloped productivity, it was really a luxury to use heavy stone as a door frame. For civilians, it seemed that they were guarding against something. But looking at the people on the roadside, Chengdu was not comparable to the city of Wei. It was a small city. So there were not many people on the street. But although there were not many people, there were still people walking. Some were pushing one-wheeled wooden carts, and some were walking in groups of 2 or 3. He saw dozens of pedestrians along the way. Although they were a bit disheveled and dirty and their clothes were shabby, he could tell that they were poor people who did hard work. Their expressions were naturally not lively. It was the kind of expressionless people who had been tortured by life. But Li Yunxin often saw this kind of expression on the faces of the people in the city of Wei, so it was not strange. Some doors were open and people were standing or sitting by the door in a daze, basking in the sun. When they saw Li Yunxin, they looked at him curiously, but when they saw Taoist wolf, they hurriedly avoided his eyes and some would hide in the house. This was normal. Many people in the city of Wei had this kind of reaction when they saw an officer or a bailiff. And Taoist wolf was a demon. It was already peaceful. That surprised Li Yunxin. Taoist Wolf said that demons and humans had been living together for a long time in the state of Yu. Now it seemed that it was true. So those sturdy and low houses, in fact, were they built like this because the people in the city were still guarding against demons? He walked and looked and soon turned a corner. At this time something new happened. First, he heard a woman's cry. The voice was panicked and helpless as if something terrible was about to happen. The voice was blocked by an old tree at the corner of the street, and he could only hear the voice but not see the person. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows and quickly walked over. Previously, Taoist Wolf almost did not speak beside him. Only when Li Yunxin asked him questions would he answer a few words in fear. Now seeing that Meng Qi was interested, he hurriedly followed. My king, not this way." Li Yunxin waved his hand and stopped under the tree at the corner of the street so that he wouldn't be seen by people over there. Then he pulled the wolf demon back. "Let me see what's new," he said with a smile. Behind the old tree was another side street. The houses were the same style as the main street they just walked through, but they looked a little more dilapidated. Probably because the people living here were not as rich as the people on the other street. There were fewer stone door frames, and some people used thick log door frames instead. The woman who shouted was one of the houses on the street. She was a short middle-aged woman, dark and skinny, as if the water in her body had been dried up by time. In fact, this was the appearance of most women in Chengdu that Li Yunxin saw. What made her voice sound panicky and helpless was that the door of her house had fallen down for some unknown reason. A door as thick as a finger was lying on the doorway. She was speaking in the dialect of Chengdu. Therefore, after listening carefully for a while, Li Yunxin realized that most of the time she was shouting, "What to do?" and then cursing the neighbors for not helping. She couldn't fix the door by herself, and even if she wanted to, she didn't have the right tools to do it. It was afternoon, and the golden sun shone on the street and the walls. The behavior and expressions of the neighbors she complained and cursed were a little strange in Li Yunxin's eyes. Normally, the neighbors should help in this kind of thing. But no one paid attention to her. The house on the left listened to her shouting for a while, and then slowly retreated and closed the door tightly. The house on the right looked at her through the crack of the door. Li Yunxin had good eyesight and saw a man and a woman behind the door who looked like a couple. The man looked a little reluctant, and twice he wanted to go out. But both times the woman behind the door reached out and pulled him back. The man turned his head and said something to his woman, and the woman also said a few words. Soon the man didn't insist, just sighed and also retreated and closed the door, as if he had something difficult to say, and made a difficult decision. Li Yunxin was not in a hurry and stood there for a full hour. During this time, four people passed by on the street. Seeing the scene in front of the woman's house, they were slightly stunned, and then quickly walked away. It seemed that they didn't want to provoke anyone. So, the sun was getting more and more westward. The sky was getting redder, and the woman looked more panicked and afraid, and began to knock on the door of her neighbor. But no one came out and they didn't pay attention to her. After another quarter of an hour, the woman seemed to be tired and ran back to the door of her house, sat on the door and wailed in despair. Li Yunxin withdrew his gaze and looked at the sky. Then he said, "Okay, let's go." Chapter 296. Taoist Wolf was puzzled by his unfathomable way of doing things. But Li Yunxin left without any hesitation. After a while he talked about other things with Taoist Wolf as if he didn't care about what happened just now. Taoist Wolf walked with him for a while. Finally, when he saw the brown wooden sign of Mu Nanju on the other side of the street, he couldn't help but ask carefully, "Your Majesty, is actually a human cultivator?" Li Yunxin turned his head to look at him and smiled. "Why do you think so?" Taoist Wolf was afraid of his smile. It looked gentle and harmless, but it was hard to guess what he was thinking. He didn't know if it was a real smile or a sneer hidden under the skin. As he looked at Li Yunxin's face, he said carefully, "You speak like a human, and you have a human cultivator's magic weapon. You don't look like a demon." Li Yunxin looked at him. "I don't think you look like a demon either. After all, you are a demon from somewhere else." Taoist Wolf paused and thought for a while. "The Sword Palace of Yu Kingdom is not a place where ordinary demons gather. Our palace master's cultivation is mysterious." He began to speak carefully again. Li Yunxin understood what he meant. He wanted her to realize how powerful the Sword Palace was, so that she would retreat in the face of difficulties. The wolf demon guessed that he was a human because he was looking at the woman. Li Yunxin ignored him. He walked a few more steps and stopped in front of the branch of Munanju in Rong City of Yu Kingdom. The shop's appearance was no different from the shops in City of Wei. The decoration was also typical of the city of Wei of Qing Kingdom. On the streets of Rong City, it was quite different and especially eye-catching. Li Yunxin looked at it for a while and frowned slightly. It was not because Munanju was out of place, but because it also existed in Rong City. This was not his time. Chain restaurants and the like were commonplace. In this era, productivity was low and purchasing power was low. The business environment was not the same as in his previous era. He used to think that it was very rare for Munanju to have its main branch in the city of Wei and branches in the 4 prefectures of the city of Wei. Now that she heard Taoist Wolf say that they had even driven to Chengdu, she was really surprised. How did they manage the logistics, human resources, and capital management? After looking around for a while, he walked in and found that the layout of the restaurant was the same as the Munanju he often ate in the city of Wei. There was no one in the shop, only 2 assistants sitting by the counter, dozing lazily, in sharp contrast to the numb and sleepy people on the street outside. He only looked up when he heard footsteps. As soon as it saw Li Yunxin and the wolf demon behind him, it immediately perked up, but it wasn't out of panic or fear. A waiter knocked on the counter with his knuckles. The shopkeeper got up from behind the counter and greeted them with sleepy eyes. "Oh, you two are here. You two are here." That was what the innkeeper often said, regardless of whether they were regular customers or not. But when the shopkeeper rubbed his eyes and looked carefully at Li Yunxin, he was slightly stunned. Then he showed a look of surprise and said sincerely, "Oh, it's you, young master." Li Yunxin was also stunned. He was familiar with this shopkeeper. At that time he shocked prefectural magistrate Lu Laodao to death, and then went to Munanju in the city with Lu Laodao for a meal to relieve Laodao's hunger. After eating, he went out and found Inspector Yin Pingji waiting for him in the hall on the first floor talking to him. At that time, the shopkeeper thought that he and Lu Laodao might be the nobles that Inspector Yin was familiar with, so he not only exempted them from paying for the food and drinks, but also sent someone to deliver another meal to the Dragon King Temple. Li Yunxin had a very good memory, so he remembered this person. Then he remembered that Inspector Yin called him Old Wang that day, and after a slight daze he smiled and cupped his hands. "Shopkeeper Wang. Long time no see. Why are you here?" "Yes. Why did he come here?" He didn't see Shopkeeper Wang before, so he didn't look at the 2 waiters carefully. Now he looked at the 2 waiters in the shop again and he found them familiar. He must have seen them in the shop in the city of Wei before. It was only a few days since the Taoist priests of the Langya cave entered the city of Wei, sealed the city, and then came to the burnt city. It was understandable that one of these acquaintances had something to do and escaped. But now, all of them had escaped. Li Yunxin glanced at the shop again. This time he saw the person behind the wine cabinet in the corner. He was also familiar. After he planned to kill the 9th young master and Ling Kongzi, he talked with Qing Liangji, who possessed the child beggar, in another branch of Munanju in the north of the city. And now the person behind the wine cabinet in the shop, it was the shopkeeper of that branch. Behind the wine cabinet, that person nodded at Li Yunxin from afar and cupped his hands. Li Yunxin exhaled softly and stopped her footsteps without batting an eyelid. He turned his head slightly to look outside the door. At this time, Shopkeeper Wang also returned the greeting with a kind and friendly smile. It was really like meeting someone from the same hometown. His tone was warm and intimate. "Thanks to you, these people in the city just happened to go to the main shop to check the accounts a few days ago. That's why they escaped. When they came back to take a look, wow, the fire was terrifying. Where else could they go? If they went to the north, they might encounter more disasters. Coincidentally, this shop here is short of manpower, so they all came here. Thanks to Taoist Wolf for taking care of them." After saying this, he cupped his hands to the Taoist Wolf. The wolf demon looked at Shopkeeper Wang, then at Li Yunxin and remained silent. Li Yunxin thought for a while and slowly walked to a table near the window. He lifted his clothes and sat down. He looked at Shopkeeper Wang with a smile. "Where is your main shop?" "In the capital. The capital of our Daqing state." As Shopkeeper Wang spoke, he ordered the waiter to prepare wine and dishes. He named more than 10 dishes in one breath. Li Yunxin realized that they were all the dishes he and Lu Laodao had ordered the other day. Then the shopkeeper came over and invited the silent Taoist wolf to take a seat. He also sat down and accompanied him. Those days, the waterway from the capital to the city of Wei was not safe. "I happened to come here to do something, so I took a detour. It was a blessing." Li Yunxin was silent for a while and said, "Since your business is so big, you seem to have branches everywhere?" Shopkeeper Wang smiled proudly. "Yes. Every big and famous city has a branch of our Munanju." At this time, the first dish was served. stir-fried pork with hibiscus and a pot of Munan chun. Li Yunxin liked to eat this when he lived in the Dragon King temple. But now he only looked and did not eat. The shopkeeper looked at him and picked up the chopsticks. This is a branch in Chengdu, but the taste is not bad. Look, he apologized, picked up a piece and ate it. Then he put down the chopsticks and wiped his beard. It's not bad at all. Li Yunxin poured himself a cup of wine. He pinched it with his fingers and smelled it before drinking it. Who is the shopkeeper? Shopkeeper Wang smiled. Our head shopkeeper is a heroine. Her surname is Hua and her name is Munan. Munanju is named after her. Good. Li Yunxin only said this one word and did not say anything else. Shopkeeper Wang sat for a while and said a few words to Taoist Wolf. Then he stood up, cupped his hands and returned to the back of the counter. It seemed that he was going to sleep again. Taoist Wolf blinked and looked at Li Yunxin, who was sitting by the window and bathing in the sunset. Who are these people? Li Yunxin suddenly frowned and asked him. Demon Wolf was stunned, just like what he said. Li Yunxin looked at him. There was originally a branch here, and then this group of people came here, and then you allowed them to stay in the city? Yes. Demon Wolf answered hesitantly. The branch in Chengdu has a history of more than 100 years. Oh, at that time, I didn't even have spiritual intelligence. This Munenju. When I came here, I met the palace lord. The palace lord said that he also likes the taste here, so no one dared to touch them. At this point, he suddenly stopped talking. It seemed that he was afraid that he would say something wrong. Seeing that Li Yunxin did not intend to ask further, he asked carefully, Your Majesty, is he really a human cultivator? He previously suspected that Li Yunxin was a human cultivator. Now that he heard that Meng Qi knew this person from Munanju in the city of Wei, he felt that his speculation was closer. However, when it came to Li Yunxin, the wolf Taoist didn't seem to think there was anything strange about these people from Munanju. Maybe it was because of what he said, that the palace lord of the Sword Palace thought highly of this Munanju for some reason. As for the other demons, they didn't need to know why, they only needed to know how. But on the other hand, the people of the branch in the city of Wei happened to come out, which could be explained by extreme coincidence and good luck. But then the shopkeeper remembered him. Not only did he remember him, but he also remembered the food and wine he ordered a long time ago. This could not be explained by coincidence or good eyesight. Shopkeeper Wang almost said to Li Yunxin, I pay a lot of attention to you and it's an unusual attention. Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and thought for a while. Then he didn't say anything, nor did he answer the wolf Taoist. Now the wolf Taoist was even more perturbed. He turned to look out of the window. Autumn began half a month ago. Now it was only a dozen days before the weather turned cold, and the days were much shorter. At this time, the sun slowly set beside the mountain, and the last afterglow shone down. The wolf Taoist looked a little impatient, but he didn't dare to urge Li Yunxin. The dishes of Munanju were served like water, and soon the table was full. In the end, Li Yunxin frowned at the table full of dishes. Shopkeeper Wang took a nap behind the counter, and when he came out again he found that Li Yunxin just held the dishes without eating, so he came over to ask politely. Li Yunxin raised his hand and pointed at a plate in front of him. What's this? Shopkeeper Wang took a look and blinked. Phoenix Eye White Jade Silk? It looks like it. But the Phoenix Eye White Jade Silk of Munanju in the city of Wei is made of dried longan and chicken shreds. How can you coax me with shredded mushrooms? Li Yunxin leaned back in the chair and raised his hand to draw a circle. The table is full of meat and vegetables, all made of vegetarian dishes. Shopkeeper Wang, do you think I'm a rabbit? Shopkeeper Wang listened to his words and laughed. Young master is an expert. Such a table full of vegetarian dishes, ordinary people can't even taste it. But young master can tell with one look, so you're a person with taste. Li Yunxin smiled. What's going on? Shopkeeper Wang looked at Taoist Wolf and smiled. It's like this. Our state of you has a sword palace law. It said that Palace Master Yang Jianzi cares for the common people, and thinks that humans and demons are all living things in the world. And demons are born of birds and beasts. Therefore all living things are equal, don't eat each other. He stroked his beard and paced a few steps. At first, this sword palace law said that humans can only eat grains. As for the demons, they also needed to eat grains. But later, the nobles in Zhanghua, the capital of the state of Yu, felt that meat is more delicious, so they ignored it. Since Yang Jianzi is the state preceptor of the state of Yu, they could only acquiesce. Therefore the people of Zhanghua can eat whatever they want, but not in front of demons. But here we don't have any nobles in the capital, so we still follow the Sword Palace law. Since that's the case, our Moonanju can't break the law. We have to look at the big picture and take care of the feelings of the demon cultivators. Because of this, young master saw this table today. Try it, the taste is really good. Li Yunxin was stunned for a while, then looked at Taoist Wolf. Is that true? Taoist Wolf hesitated for a while and said, about this, well, we don't care if they eat at home. It's fine as long as they don't eat in front of us. Li Yunxin sighed and pointed at Demon Wolf. You're a fundamentalist. You can't be a fundamentalist. Since people respect your feelings, how can you not respect other people's feelings? Look at this restaurant, look at what it has become. Did the chef in the back of the kitchen need time to study all these different vegetable dishes? Doesn't he need energy? You're wasting good resources. Why don't you use them to build a beautiful society where humans and demons live in harmony? Demon Wolf stared at him, not daring to speak, and could only look left and right. Unexpectedly, Li Yunxin clapped his hands again. Good. When I came here, I saw you raise chickens in the yard, and you told me there's a kind of pufferfish in Rong River. Shopkeeper Wang hurriedly said, Oh, so Taoist Wolf is also an interesting person. We don't have the good fortune to enjoy the pufferfish in Rong River, but the Taoists often ask us to cook them and send them to them in private. I think Taoist Master Wolf has good intentions for the young Gongzi, so the young Gongzi should have a taste. Taoist Wolf couldn't sit still anymore and suddenly stared at Shopkeeper Wang. This is a noble guest. How can you fix these vegetarian dishes? Take it away and change it to chicken, duck, beef and mutton. Go. Shopkeeper Wang hurriedly shrank his head and quickly left. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and looked up and down at Taoist Wolf, who couldn't sit still anymore. So you call the shots in Chengdu? Is there an official of the state of you? Demon Wolf hurriedly said. Yes, they are all living well, waiting. So there are laws of the state of you. Li Yunxin smiled and poured himself another cup of wine, but it seems that the law of the Sword Palace is more effective than the law of the state of you. Chapter 297. The Wolf Taoist didn't know what he meant. But he still wanted Li Yunxin to back off. Even if he couldn't back off, at least he shouldn't hurt him. So he hesitated for a while and said, After all, there are always more people. We demons are small in number, so we can't be weak. Fortunately, our palace master Yang Jianzi has a profound cultivation. In fact, people in Rong City get along well with demon cultivators. Good. You're right. Li Yunxin looked out of the window. It was already dark, and there was only a trace of the sun on the horizon, but it soon faded. But he was not in a hurry. Instead, he waited calmly for the waiters to remove all the vegetarian dishes in front of him and replace them with another one before he started to eat. The wolf demon had something on his mind, so he couldn't eat well. After eating a few mouthfuls, he stopped eating and thought about how to get away. But Li Yunxin ate and drank heartily. Seeing this, the wolf demon was even more convinced that he must be a human cultivator. Many of his actions and habits were completely different from those of demons, which couldn't be faked. This Li Yunxin ate and drank very happily. After waiting for another hour, he finally felt like he had regained some of his humanity. He no longer looked like a savage who ate raw meat and drank blood. Finally, he drank a pot of Munanchan and put down his silver chopsticks. Looking out of the window, it was completely dark. At least the first half of the night, the city of Wei was brightly lit. There were people coming and going on the main street, and lights were lit on the porches and under the eaves. Even if it couldn't be compared with his era, it was still bright in this era. But now it was nighttime in Rong City, the street was dark, and the only light source came from the stars and the moon. But he seemed to enjoy this early autumn night. Sitting by the window of Munanju, he squinted his eyes and felt the cool breeze blowing in through the window. He was enjoying it, but the wolf Taoist looked even more restless. The wolf demon turned his head to look out of the window from time to time, as if he was a little uneasy about. The sky was completely dark. He wanted to urge Li Yunxin to leave quickly, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. After fretting for a while, he began to say some useless things. For example, the night view of the plain monastery was beautiful, and it was even more beautiful at night. Why not go back early to enjoy the night view? But this Munanju's shopkeeper and waiter were probably acquainted with Li Yunxin, so they removed the leftovers from the table and served him several plates of fruits. He said that because he ate meat today, he felt like he was going against the teachings of the Sword Palace head, so it was best to eat some dried fruits to clear his stomach and get rid of the impurities. Li Yunxin picked up the fruit and ate it for a while. After an hour, he finally got up. First, he cupped his hands in greeting to the shopkeeper and the waiters of the Southwood Inn. After exchanging a few polite words, he gently fanned himself and walked out of the Southwood Inn. The impatient monster wolf finally heaved a sigh of relief and was about to lead Li Yunxin back to Pingyuan Taoist Temple. The two of them walked for a while in the narrow streets of Chengdu. Li Yunxin found that the doors and windows of every household were tightly shut. She couldn't see any lights in any of the houses, and she couldn't hear any voices in any of the houses. Then he walked to the corner of the street where he saw the wailing woman. Li Yunxin stopped and thought for a while. He turned around and walked to that street. Behind him, Taoist Wolf became anxious again. "My king, where are you going?" Li Yunxin turned his head and looked at him in the darkness. "I saw that woman crying in the afternoon. Why do you think she was crying?" Taoist Wolf was stunned. Probably because the door was broken." "I think so too, but I think there might be some other reasons." Li Yunxin said, "I can't sleep when there's something on my mind. I have to go and see what's going on before I can feel at ease. Do you want to come with me?" He continued walking after saying that. Taoist Wolf followed him. But his tone was slowly different. My king, why don't we go back to the temple? I'll tell you more about the Sword Palace. There's a treasure in my temple. It's a relic left by an immortal thousands of years ago. Don't you want to see it?" "My king, you're just passing through Chengdu. Why do you care about those people?" He only spoke his own words, but Li Yunxin ignored him. Not long after, the two of them saw the old tree at the corner of the street. Its thick canopy stretched towards the sky in the night, as if there was a terrible secret hidden under the tree. At this time they finally heard some sounds. The sound came from afar like the sound of crying and quarreling. But the noise and crying in the afternoon was the woman's one-man show. Now the noise and crying were from a group of people. Just like in the afternoon, Li Yunxin stopped under the tree and turned to look at Taoist Wolf. "Oh, you're a wolf. Logically speaking, wolves have better hearing than humans. Won't it be better if you cultivate into a human form?" But the wolf demon wasn't in the mood to discuss these things with him. He just casually agreed and tried to persuade Li Yunxin to go back. Then he heard Li Yunxin say, "So you always want to take me away because you heard the noise here and don't want me to come here to cause trouble?" Taoist Wolf was startled. Just as he was about to speak, Li Yunxin had already looked ahead. He saw the dozens of demons in the square in the front hall of the temple in the afternoon. Some of them left a deep impression on him. Because when they saw him and Taoist Wolf walking past, they looked angry as if they didn't accept Taoist Wolf's authority. There were differences in the appearances of humans, and the wolf heads of these demonic wolves were also different in appearance. For example, some had longer kisses, some had wider eyes, and some had narrower heads. Li Yunxin remembered 3 of them. One had a tuft of white hair on its forehead, one had long and thin eyes, and the last one had a square mouth and a wide nose. It looked more like a bear's kiss than a wolf's. Now these demons were surrounding the door of the house of the widow who had cried in the afternoon. 3 small demons held torches in their hands, illuminating the front wall of the low house. The rest of them formed a semicircle around the house, as if they were guarding against something. And the door of this house was already open. It seemed that they had found a way to fix the door in the afternoon. But it wasn't secure, and now it was torn down by the demons. But the demons didn't enter the house after tearing down the door, because in the afternoon, the woman sat in front of the door and cried. She kept shouting something. She was speaking in the dialect of Chengdu. Li Yunxin slightly frowned and listened carefully for a while. Then he realized that she was shouting something like, "You cannibals, Master Teacher will make you die a horrible death." Li Yunxin was stunned. It was different from what he thought. Judging from the way the woman behaved in the afternoon and the layout of the houses along the street, Lin Sanjiu thought that it was to prevent demons from eating humans. For example, at night, demons would go to the street to find food and eat humans. Therefore, every family lived in such houses, hoping that they could stop the demons from coming. But now, the scene seemed to be very different from what he thought. Now these dozens of demons could easily pull this woman out and eat her. And this woman was crying with confidence in front of these strange creatures, and even had the mood to say something like, "Die a horrible death." This was not the reaction of ordinary people when they saw demons. His deduction was wrong. Chapter 298. So he stopped talking and continued to watch the scene with a frown. Thus, he gradually discovered some strange things. For example, although the demons looked evil, they didn't really hurt the woman. They just pulled down the door and stood outside to listen to the woman's curses. Besides, the woman was crying pitifully during the day and now she was shouting loudly. But there was no fear in her voice as Li Yunxin imagined. It was more like she was anxious and helpless. There was a doorway between the two sides. The woman was inside the door and the demons were outside. Li Yunxin suddenly thought of something and turned to look at Taoist Wolf. Can't your demons enter the house? In his previous world there was a legend. Vampires could only enter a house if they were invited. Otherwise, there would be a powerful force that prevented them from stepping into a stranger's house. Li Yunxin didn't know if there was a similar rule in Qingdu. If there was, who would supervise it? He had only asked this question subconsciously. But unexpectedly, Taoist Wolf showed a hint of surprise in his eyes. He hesitated for a while and nodded. Your Majesty also knows about this? Would be strange if he knew. Li Yunxin was startled. He didn't expect there to be such a rule. He took 2 steps forward in the darkness under the tree so that he could see the scene in front of him more clearly. Then he said, Then who will supervise it? After a while, he heard Taoist Wolf behind him say, Ah. Li Yunxin sighed slightly. He didn't know whether this wolf demon was stupid or he was used to dealing with smart people like Lu Laodao. He asked again, for example, them today or you? What can I do if I suddenly decide to break into the house? He looked at the dozens of demons in front of the woman's door. They were obviously gnashing their teeth as if they wanted to rush into the door and do something bad, but no one dared to move. Li Yunxin felt that they were afraid of someone or something. Could it be that there was some powerful force or organization in Qingdu that was keeping these demons in check? However, Taoist Wolf quickly gave him an answer. So, you've revealed your true colors? Li Yunxin was stunned and turned to look at Taoist Wolf. What do you mean? The demonic wolf blinked. I've shown my true form. Does the king not know the rules in our Qingdu? Li Yunxin looked at the woman. Seeing that they were still in a deadlock and the woman was still shouting, he decided to ignore them for the time being. Instead, he walked to Taoist Wolf's side and asked seriously, Tell me in detail. Logically speaking, this Taoist Wolf was the de facto city lord of Qingdu. Even if he was not considered vicious and cruel, he should not be a kind and amiable person. But now that he had met Li Yunxin, he already knew that Li Yunxin's cultivation level was far above his, and he had even stuffed a sword into his mouth, leaving a handle on him. Furthermore, he felt that this fellow was extremely strange. Taoist Wolf had been cultivating for more than 100 years. It was not a particularly long time for demons and cultivators, but it was considered a long life in the human world. As a result, he had seen a lot of people and things. But now, looking at Li Yunxin, he said he was a vicious enemy, but he did not do anything evil after coming to Qingdu. He said he was a harmless cultivator. The first time he saw him was at Evil King's Pitfall Mountain, and he claimed that he killed Evil King. At first, Taoist Wolf thought he was a demon, but later he speculated that he was a human cultivator. Because of this hesitation, he did not dare to act rashly. Li Yunxin asked him many things to figure out the background of the Sword Palace in Qingdu. Didn't the demonic wolf also figure out Li Yunxin's background through the questions and answers? But it was hard to say whether what he touched was what Li Yunxin showed him on purpose or what he mistakenly thought. At this time, Li Yunxin asked him about the rules in Qingdu. Taoist Wolf wanted to deceive her, but he suddenly had a change of mind and thought that he had a good idea. Therefore he paused, glanced at the dozen or so fiendish demons in the deep night, and told Li Yunxin the truth. Your Majesty, you don't know, there is a rule in our country of you. This rule is a long story. It was set more than 1,000 years ago when the country of you was just established. Taoist Wolf hid in the shadow of the big tree, hiding his thoughts, and said to Li Yunxin in a calm tone, It's this demon that can't enter people's houses. For example, the dozen or so demons you see now, if they really want to break in, they have to show their true forms. But even if they show their true forms, they are still demons that show their true forms, so they still can't enter. If they insist on breaking in, once they enter the door, their cultivation and spiritual wisdom will be immediately abolished, and they will become ordinary beasts. They have to come out again to recover their cultivation and spiritual wisdom. That's the scene you see now. Taoist Wolf said while looking at Li Yunxin, This rule is the law of nature in this country of you. As long as it's under the rule of you, it's effective. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, there are no exceptions. Therefore you see they make a big fuss, but the demons don't dare to enter. That woman also doesn't dare to come out. That's why there's such a rule. If a person walks on the street at night and gets eaten by demons, it's not considered a violation of the rules of the Sword Palace. This rule was set by our palace master. After saying this, Taoist Wolf carefully looked at Li Yunxin. He wanted to judge whether this Li Yunxin was a demon cultivator or a human cultivator. If a demon cultivator knew about this, he would think about it for a while, wondering if he could stay here for a long time. If a human cultivator knew about this, he might even be happy. But he found that Li Yunxin didn't have any reaction. After hearing his words, he suddenly became silent, as if a huge problem had appeared in his mind. Taoist Wolf waited for a while, for a full quarter of an hour. He found that Li Yunxin was still silent. Finally, he couldn't help asking, "What are you thinking about, Your Majesty?" Li Yunxin looked up at him in the darkness, frowning slightly. "You call this a rule?" Taoist Wolf was stunned. He didn't expect him to ask about this, so he said, Of course it's a rule. Haven't you thought about who set this rule?" Taoist Wolf was stunned again. Then he looked at Li Yunxin strangely. "A rule is a rule. Of course it's there since that day, right? It's probably decided by heaven and earth, right?" Li Yunxin shook his head and said no more. He realized that he shouldn't talk about this with the wolf demon. Perhaps it would be better to talk about this with Lu Laodao. Because this wolf demon had the typical thinking mode of this era. He didn't seek to understand a lot of things. In his era, people knew a lot of knowledge and learning. He was also trained to think about why, and the more essential reasons behind the phenomena. Because he had received systematic and practical education, he knew that the operation and development of everything in the world had its own internal mechanism. It couldn't be explained by saying, "It's supposed to be like this." For example, this wolf demon only knew how to cultivate. He didn't think about why wild beasts could develop spiritual intelligence or cultivate. It had been like this since ancient times, so he was already used to it. People in this world also had the same thinking mode. Many things didn't seek to understand, and they were too lazy to think about the deep reasons behind them. Anyway, with the experience passed down from generation to generation, it was enough to know how to do it. Therefore, the wolf demon thought that rules were rules, even if the rules looked a little strange. However, in Li Yunxin's world, he knew that although many things in this world were different from his previous world, the basic pattern was roughly the same. For example, he used a talisman to draw a handful of salt. Although this sounded magical, if one seriously studied the way of painting and understood the principles behind it, they would realize that this process was quite perfect and reasonable. The only difference between this world and his was that some fundamental laws had changed. But if the cultivators of this world went to his world and saw a man crawling into an iron box, twisting it, pressing on the iron box, and then running away, even if they didn't understand the reason behind it, they would still find it miraculous. Therefore, he knew that many things in this world also operated according to certain rules. He knew all the rules, so he could use common sense to explain many seemingly magical phenomena. But the problem was, it seemed that he couldn't explain the matter in front of him. Within the borders of the Yu Kingdom, would a demon cultivator become a wild beast without spiritual intelligence when he ran into a human's home, and then become a demon cultivator when he ran out? This kind of rule was too magical even in this world, and it was very much like a story made up by those ignorant people in the secular world based on their own imagination. Li Yunxin tried to explain this matter according to some of the principles of cultivation and formations he knew, but in the end, he realized that it was impossible to explain. This kind of rule didn't make sense. For example, in his original world, someone had said to him, "In this city, you only need to clap your hands and you can fly." This completely surpassed his understanding of the rules of this world. Li Yunxin let out a light breath, and a bold inference appeared in his mind. Perhaps this rule didn't originate from heaven and earth, but from people. As for who it could be, there was a similar question that had been hidden in his heart for a very, very long time: the temporary imperial residence in the Dragon Palace. He was very surprised when he first heard this matter from Lu Ling, because the temporary imperial residence and the Dragon Palace also surpassed his understanding of the rules of this world. It was as if someone had forcibly embedded such a thing into this world, making it seem strange and abrupt. Of course, this strange and abrupt was something that only he could understand, because it was very similar to the construction of a home in his previous world. Li Yunxin was silent under this old tree for a while, and then he let out a light breath. He had an inference in his heart, but he wasn't very sure. There was another thing in this city that people of this era were used to, but he found strange. He planned to connect the two. Chapter 299. So he suddenly turned to Taoist Wolf and said, "Then let's go and have a look. It's the first time I've encountered such a strange thing." As he spoke, he was about to walk over there. Unexpectedly, this Taoist wolf pulled his sleeve from behind. "Your Majesty." You can't go. Li Yunxin turned around abruptly and stared at him sternly. Only then did the wolf demon realize that he had lost his composure in a moment of desperation. He hurriedly let go of his hand as if he had been electrocuted. But he still said, "Your Majesty. You can't go. Touch me one more time and I'll immediately refine your soul." Li Yunxin stared at him for a long time until a layer of sparkling sweat seeped out of this Taoist wolf's nose. Then he said, "Why can't I go?" The wolf demon hesitated for a while, then raised his hand to scratch his furry ears and sighed. "Alas, Your Majesty. Alas, how should I say this? Are you a human cultivator or a demon cultivator?" Li Yunxin thought for a while. "What do you think? If Your Majesty is a demon cultivator, I really don't know whether I should say this or not. If Your Majesty is a human cultivator, maybe it's okay to say it." Taoist wolf stared at Li Yunxin in the darkness for a while. His eyes reflected a faint green light because of the fire in the distance. Then he said, "But I think, Your Majesty is a human cultivator, right?" "Whatever you think," Li Yunxin said casually. "Hurry up and get to the point." The wolf demon thought that Li Yunxin had admitted it. So he suddenly puffed out his chest, no longer as timid and weary as before. Instead, he showed some of the imposing manner of the Lord of Chengdu City. "Then Your Majesty should know one thing. In this Chengdu City, I'm not completely in charge now." Li Yunxin thought for a while. "So, the magistrate's office in this city is also in charge?" The wolf demon shook his head. "I'm not talking about this. Those officials and bailiffs in the secular world can't control us. It's been like this since I took over Chengdu City. I'm talking about the dozen demon cultivators that Your Majesty saw in my Pingyuan monastery in the afternoon. They were the ones the king was looking at right now. Your Majesty might not be able to guess the details. Let me explain it to you in detail. That means they don't always listen to you. Or it could be said that your ideals are different and to a certain extent you're just a figurehead. Am I right?" Li Yunxin interrupted him. The demon wolf was ready to give a long speech, but he didn't expect Li Yunxin to say everything he wanted to say, in just 3 sentences. He was stunned for a moment before he exclaimed, "Huh? How did you know?" Li Yunxin smiled. "It's just child's play. What does that have to do with the present?" Taoist wolf sighed and said, "Your Majesty only knows one side and not the other. My Pingyuan temple is a registered Taoist temple in the Sword Palace. In terms of status, it was equivalent to the government of Chengdu in the secular world. Since I'm the Abbey Dean, I'm also a registered cultivator in the Sword Palace. Logically speaking, the dozen or so demon cultivators in my monastery should be under my control and listen to my orders. In the end, they completely ignored me and only did superficial things. Your Majesty, do you know why?" Li Yunxin didn't say anything. Taoist wolf didn't expect him to answer, so he continued, "Previously in Southwood Inn, the shopkeeper told Your Majesty about the Sword Palace's rules. Alas, this kind of thing should have been slowly eased. Your Majesty is a human cultivator, and after hearing about this, you must think that I'm bullying these people in Chengdu, but you don't know that I don't care about them. Your Majesty also saw that I have chickens and ducks in my backyard. Who cares about eating or not eating? It's the dozen or so that Your Majesty saw. Who are they relying on?" Alas. Taoist wolf sighed. "It's Taoist jackal." "Oh, there's also Taoist jackal." Li Yunxin thought for a while, then said, "So you want to say, before you took over Chengdu it was Taoist jackal who was in charge. Now that you're here, although he's no longer in charge, he incited these dozen or so demon cultivators to make trouble for you." Speaking up to this point he paused. "Don't tell me, when Taoist jackal was in charge he was what I call a fundamentalist. He didn't allow people to touch living things. After you came here he began to imitate the style of the capital, thinking that it's okay to eat meat at home?" Goblin wolf hurriedly said, Yes. Your Majesty, how do you know this?" "It's just an old-fashioned plot." Li Yunxin sighed. "Tell me in detail. Your Sword Palace and Taoist jackal." In fact, at this time, Li Yunxin began to be interested in this Sword Palace, so much so that he thought he could spend more time here. Because the more places he went and the more things he saw, the more he realized that there were many secrets in this world. If this world was originally a piece of white paper, then no doubt in these thousands of years, it had been profoundly and comprehensively changed by some people. This world was not what he thought it was. The traces left behind by some former existences seemed to be everywhere. At first, he planned to imitate the dragon god and quickly kill a few big demons to frighten the small fry. But now he realized the value of Yang Jianzi, the palace master of Sword Palace, seemed to be more than just a character that could be killed. Taoist Wolf was a little hesitant about his proposal. But Li Yunxin said again, "What are you hesitating for? Now at least in this Chengdu under this tree I'm the knife and you're the fish. If you're obedient maybe you'll become a salted fish. Whether it's here or in the Sword Palace, you still have a chance to turn things around. If you're not obedient," he raised his hand and pointed there. "There are still a dozen waiting for me to interrogate them. If I were you I'd take care of the present first. Only when you're alive can you talk about the future." Taoist Wolf's eyes shifted between Li Yunxin and the dozen or so demon cultivators. Finally he sighed and shook his furry ears. "Alas, forget it. I came to Chengdu 50 years ago. Chengdu is a small city on the border of the Yu Kingdom and deep in the mountains. Although it's only 1,000 li away from the capital, it's actually surrounded by mountains. Transportation is very inconvenient. It should be a barren land. But the nobles in the capital say that the soil and water in Chengdu are good and like to use the soil and stones here. Thus, the king thinks that most of the people in Chengdu are doing this work. After leaving the city and walking for another 20 li, there are a few mountains. At the foot of the mountains is a stone mine called Hongling. The young and strong people in the city all work there, mining the soil and stones. I don't know what the people in the capital use them for. This task was entrusted to me by the Sword Palace. They've been mining for hundreds of years. The reason I came to Chengdu is to supervise this matter. Let's talk about Taoist Jackal. Before I came here he was in charge here. Later, he made a mistake and was summoned back to the capital to see the palace master. Then he was dismissed. But after I came here, I slowly found out that Taoist Jackal had escaped from the capital and gathered a group of demons to occupy that Hongling. He's a fugitive, but no one in the capital came to catch him. My cultivation level is lower than his, so I can't do anything to him. And I heard he has a backer." Hearing this, Li Yunxin smiled. He liked this kind of thing. He liked this kind of complicated matter where all the parties were involved. If the water wasn't muddy, how could he fish? So he asked, "Backer. What backer can make you unable to do anything to him?" Instead, he roped in all the demon cultivators in your monastery? According to what you said, you were sent here by the Sword Palace. Does the Sword Palace not care about this matter? Taoist Wolf clapped his hands. The king is right. But after saying this, he hesitated. He glanced at Li Yunxin a few times and stammered, "Speaking of what reliance? I don't know either. I only heard Taoist Jackal say that he has a very high cultivation level. Even he respects him. That Taoist Jackal is at the transformative stage, even he has to bow down to him." Li Yunxin thought for a moment and laughed. "Ha, you're worried that I'm that person. Then there was no need to think too much." "Not really. Go on." A quarter of an hour had passed. The situation on the other side of the street changed again. There was a fire at the end of the street. It looked as if a group of people were rushing over with torches. However, according to the Sword Palace law that Taoist Wolf mentioned, no one was allowed to go out at night. He didn't know if it was a human or a demon. Seeing that it will take some time for the fire to reach the woman's room, Li Yunxin is not in a hurry. He turns his head to look at the wolf monster again. The wolf demon composed himself. "What I'm thinking is, that Gao Xiu should also be a demon cultivator. A few years ago, people in the capital city were no longer prohibited from eating living things. In fact, there were also signs of this in the prefectural cities below. When I first came to Chengdu, the city was more lively than it is now. There were people in the city who slaughtered pigs and sheep in their own homes. I also like to eat blood, so of course I'm happy to see this, so I raised chickens and ducks in the backyard. But later, that Taoist Jackal came back, colluded with that demon cultivator and gathered a group of demons and became like this. It's not just our Chengdu, other prefectural cities are also like this. I can't understand, what is the background of the person that Taoist Jackal relies on? He dares to openly oppose the Sword Palace. Thus, until now, it was really difficult. I want to go to the capital city to see the palace master, but how can I see the palace master whenever I want to? I don't understand. If something big really happens here and the palace master is alarmed, he will probably pay attention to me." Saying this, he couldn't help but look at the situation in front of the woman's door, and then quickly withdrew his gaze. Li Yunxin also turned his head to look. At this time he could clearly see who it was. It really was a person, and not an ordinary commoner. The person in front was a well-built man dressed in black and wearing a square bird feather hat. There was a dark red patch on his chest, and on it was written the word constable in the language of Yu. Although the style of the clothes was different from the style of the Qing kingdom, Li Yunxin guessed that this was probably the constable of Yu. The peacock plume was not something that could be seen everywhere, and only officials with status could use it. For example, the senior constables of the Qin kingdom could only use a pheasant plume. Behind this constable were a dozen officials, and looking at their clothes, they were the constables of Yu. Naturally, Yu was not as wealthy as the Qin kingdom, and it was obvious from the clothes of these officials. Furthermore, the official clothes they wore seemed to have not been touched for a long time. Li Yunxin's eyes were good, and he could even see the creases on the clothes. They had probably been hidden for a long time, and they only wore it tonight. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.